Now I gotta admit, it isn't often that Jeff introduces a new skin to the game that fundamentally changes the way I look at a character. Of course there's something to be said for tall men wearing suits, but making the jump from hold it together to your daughter calls me daddy too is quite the feat. I mean, the last time they introduced a legendary Zenyatta skin to the game, we ended up with that monstrosity. It isn't enough that we got no story beats for Zen, he now also gets bodied by every DLC hero added to the game, and on top of that, they make us wait years for new cosmetics just to eventually deliver distilled disappointment. I start getting the feeling that somebody over at Blizzard really doesn't like the robot monk. But if I want to call myself a Zenyatta main, then obviously I can't just skip it, so there I go spending my hard-earned currency on an item that I didn't want in the first place. Contrary to that, Sigma is a character I never really played, now featuring a skin that I really want. The natural next step will be getting into the game and willingly forsake a decent chunk of my coins to purchase what is probably the best skin introduced since... Wait, why can't I just buy it?
What do you mean I actually have to play the game to get it?
Okay, fine, that's not a problem. In fact, I will do you one better. Just winning 9 games is way too easy, so why don't we make it a bit more exciting? Utilizing the vast experience of 1 hour of Sigma gameplay, I'm going to be victorious in 9 games of Overwatch, thusly earning the right to use that skin. That's right, my friends, I'm becoming a Sigma one-trick. Well, that was the idea anyway, but little did I know that Jeff had different plans for me. However, before we get into that, let's talk about what happened on our last episode. Is that my hero OST overused yet? Nah. Having read numerous complaints in the forums about Genji being way too strong, I decided that I had to see it firsthand. Of course, Grandmasters would be able to make full use of Genji's newfound power, but whether or not he's actually overpowered would only be decided by a final test. Ultimately, I would be judge and jury, Dragon Blade in hand, to find out if any random support player, prominently myself, would be able to abuse Genji's buff to the extent described online. And while I was fully prepared to commit my life to the blade, one-tricking Genji in sheer disregard of my incompetence, I couldn't help but be led astray by any man's ultimate desire. A new cosmetic. I mean, let's be real here, considering I buy my golden weapons on the rule of cool, I don't think any of you should be surprised to hear that Sigma's new skin swiftly made me consider hard switching my main hero. But with only an hour of Sigma experience to my name, winning 9 games in 12 days on a role as important as the main tank one seems like a nigh-on impossibility. Now, some of you are probably going to say that the reason I never play Sigma is because he's an actually difficult character to play. And you would be right. But that was before I knew just how good Sigma can work against a number of heroes that I really hate. There used to be a time when hearing Doomfist use his ultimate would actually make me nervous, but no longer. If anything, he's the one that should be scared of me now. However, let's not forget that only because Sigma has the damage output of a DPS that he's still a tank. Though granted, considering how much time the enemies are spending running away from me, it is an easy mistake to make. The problem is just that, because playing Sigma requires a bit more of a methodical approach, my usual WM1 Reinhardt style is not going to work out. I had to learn how to play Sigma from scratch, and that, my friends, is the real challenge here. What I'm going to show you is the very first match in which I decided to take up the Sigma challenge. That's right, all the clips you have seen up until now have been recorded after the game I'm about to highlight. And let me tell you, this was a trial by fire. Our story today takes place on Junkertown. Now, Junkertown is one of those maps that I have very mixed feelings about. As a payload map, it is definitely in the upper echelon of game modes in Overwatch, but to say that I had a concrete game plan on this map would be a bold-faced lie. Though the first challenge I had to face was not related to the map or even the enemy team, but actually my second tank. With this being my first game of the day and having already made up my mind about becoming a Sigma one-trick, I was having a very hard time surrendering my hero. But before we could even discuss any further details or reasoning, Comboat Fan 1 decided to go for the Alpha Chad move that is leaving the game, so that neither of us had to play a character we didn't want to play. Truly, with a sacrifice made so early, I felt it was my responsibility to pick up the torch and use his guiding light to lead my team to victory. The second tank slot will be filled up by Potato, and with a spring in my step, I decided to engage the enemies and begin this match. The area around the cart was swiftly turned into a mobile arena, with every beefy tank deciding to brawl it out for supremacy while our squishy teammates were taking cover. But the aggressive poking from high ground in combination with the bold dive sights of the enemy diva forced me to retreat for some momentary healing. It wasn't until Potato vaporized the enemy Reinhardt that we had broken the stalemate. While I was not sure where the enemies had vanished to, Potato continued her onslaught with a D-Mac just to further pressure the remaining defenders. And while all of that was going down, still unaware of the enemy team's location, I decided to take a stroll around the buildings to dish out an express ticket to Staggerville. I made sure to cover my flank before flanking the flanker's flank, and as it turned out, I was not the only one who was unaware of the... This has no right to be difficult to say. I made sure to cover my flank before flanking the flanker's flank, and as it turned out, I was not the only one unaware of other players' positioning. Unfortunately, I was not given more than a moment of celebration because by the time I reconnected with the card, I found myself with more hammers in my face than I was comfortable with. We may be down, but most assuredly not out, as Amanda kept harassing the enemies from the safety of a health pack. Not only did she stop them from reinforcing their defensive position, she even baited them into engaging her, and the DMAC that came as a result of that would grant us a window of opportunity to come back swinging. The scent of blood was in the water now, but to make sure we couldn't bite at our prey, the opposing Sombra dropped an EMP on us that connected with 5 members of our team. A nano-boosted Reinhardt was supposed to beat us into submission, but we tactically dispersed, not allowing him to land any hits. It is time to show these beginners how that combo is done, releasing an EMP of our own that gave me the courage to use my ultimate as well. As much as I was happy about connecting my ult with anybody at all, I hadn't factored in Bella's ability to hold down right-click. She can cancel my ultimate, but she can't cancel my ridiculous damage output, putting a swift end to Sombra's hacking spree. Sadly, I was not left with enough HP to successfully duel the opposing Ashe as well, earning myself a royal teabag. I can't say that I didn't deserve it, but still, I also didn't like it. If nothing else, I definitely didn't want my first game in the Sigma challenge to end in a first point full hold. If I want to win 9 matches, heck, if I want to win this one match, then I have to get creative. The enemies had reset our position once again, just that this time they were determined to keep us in the spawn. When an amplification matrix was not enough to strike us down, they decided to drop a diva bomb on top of us, but naturally that ultimate would be no match for the power of my barrier. When the defenders realized that none of these plays were enough to take us down, they began aggressively emptying the remainder of the ultimate bank until I was sick and tired of it. I used my gravitic flux to raise the knight up high, offering him up to the onslaught of my entire team. The cornerstone of their defensive lineup has been shattered, allowing us to finally move the card forward. At this point, it was obvious to us that their team stands and falls on the back of their Reinhardt, meaning that if we find a way to keep him on the respawn train, we'd put ourselves in a great position to win this match. With our game plan at the ready, Potato yeeted her ultimate into a perfectly timed EMP that would take out the main tank. Dedicating 2 ultimates to the elimination of one player may seem like overkill, but the result speaks for itself. We had finally been able to get past the gates after a successful first point capture. It may have taken a lot of time and effort to get here, but now that we've gotten this far, all we have to do is play our cards right and keep up the momentum.
Can this hacking nonsense finally stop?
Listen here, I would not be able to put on a stellar performance at the best of times when playing Sigma, but having to play against a pesky Sombra definitely is not helping my case. I mean, for crying out loud, how do other Sigma players deal with this? At least on Reinhardt I can keep on swinging when I get hacked, but Sigma is so incredibly reliant on his abilities that I just don't know what to do. But fine, 2 can play at that game. I had full confidence in Amanda being the superior Sombra player in this lobby, so I knew that if I was able to create some space, she would come in clutch with a massive EMP. The best tanks in the game are forged in the fires of competition, struck repeatedly by hardship and challenge until eventually they emerge as gods. With the drums of war at heart, I stomped onto the battlefield to create space and nothing but space. I had successfully pushed the squishies into a corner, allowing Amanda to charge her EMP and use it just in time to counter their nano Rhine. Armed with a nano boost of my own and the flames of fury burning in my chest, I decimated each and every opponent that did as much as daring to breathe the same air as me. Revenge would be mine, and the objective at this point was barely a bonus. Oh, jeez, don't know what went into me there. Oh, I know. Screw you, Sombra. At last, we were on the home stretch. Victory now was more than a faint image in my mind, and I was certain that if I'm able to win my first game, completing the Sigma challenge would also be in the realm of possibility. All that stood between me and one of the best skins in the game was this final part of Junkertown and that just forsaken Sombra player. Well aware of the fact that this whole momentum thing did not work out all that well last time, I tried to give a real Sigma spin on my gameplay by actually putting some thought into what I'm doing. Connecting my boulder with the enemy Ana was a great start, but catching 2 people my ultimate was even better. While I was feeling pretty smug about dodging Sombra sidelines to avoid getting hacked again, what I didn't expect was the Roadhog switch. I had my ultimate cancelled once again, and to top it all off, I was pulled into a hack just to have my attempted escape be met with yet another EMP. I may have survived that onslaught, but I was definitely not happy about the chain of events that had just taken place. Thankfully, the enemy's overconfidence would be their doom, as an aggressive push was countered by a means of a multi-angled attack. Their frontline had been swiftly dismantled by the combined forces of my team, and we were now on track to finish the final objective. Hey, can we like skip this part? Yeah, the part where you go on that dumb flank and die? What do you mean it builds character? I died often enough already. Oh, we're not at 10 minutes yet. Well, that is awkward. Okay, so all you have to know is that I died, and we're back in spawn. To make sure it doesn't stay like that, Raze and I pushed up to defuse the enemy team's aggression and make sure they couldn't post up in front of our spawn room. With our team now regrouped, Potato tossed a Diva Bomb into another EMP that, while failing to get any eliminations, definitely bought us the space we needed to move in. The only thing that could destroy our hopes for victory would be indecisiveness, so I took it upon myself to lead the troops into battle and boosting the morale by cancelling the enemy Reinhardt's ultimate. While the time bank gave us a full sense of security, what followed was a literal minute-long back and forth on the card in which we have been trading blows with no side crystallizing as an obvious victor. Attackers and defenders alike have been exhausting their resources time and time again, but as much as the spear could not be shattered, the shield as well wouldn't budge. When the clock read 30 seconds until overtime, we all knew that this couldn't continue. In an attempt of ending this fight once and for all, Amanda boldly dashed into the enemies for the biggest EMP yet seen in this match. The enemies were now completely defenseless, and what the Diva Bomb could not eradicate would be cleaned up by a Deadeye. A wonderful combo that would guarantee Potato the play of the game, but to wrap this match up, we had to make the final incision. Finally, after a long match filled with hardship, we were about to engage in the very last team fight. And well, what can I say? Our will may be unbroken, but our bodies will be crushed under the combined power of 5 ultimate abilities. We kept fighting until the very end, but at last the defenders will come out victorious. And with that, they ended my Sigma legacy before it ever had a chance to begin. The end. If there was one hero in Overwatch whose creation you could stop by traveling back in time, which one would you choose? While I am certain that your favorite hero is going to significantly impact who you make your target, I feel like the vast majority of us can agree on the fact that there is one character in this game that was designed with the explicit purpose of removing all the fun from the game. If you play any of the heroes in Overwatch that actually use cool abilities, so not Widowmaker, chances are that you hate Sombra about as much as I do. Now listen, you don't need to be a Zenyatta main to dislike what Sombra can do to you and your team. Anywhere on the spectrum of poking you in the backline to making your team C9 the card, it's like there's not a dang thing she can do that isn't annoying. It really hammers home the fact that Blizzard designs characters by how much fun they are, as long as they have fun for the one playing them. And in the case of Sombra, the real fun is making sure that nobody else in the lobby can derive even an ounce of enjoyment out of the game. I mean, don't get me wrong, depending on the character you play, there definitely is outplay potential to be had. And trust me when I say that there are few things as satisfying as shutting down a Sombra aiming to ruin your day. But some characters have less defensive capabilities than others, meaning that what is a general nuisance to one can be a reason to ult F4 for somebody else. It's one thing to get outplayed via means of a big brain body block utilizing every tool in your arsenal to come out ahead on any given engagement. But no person in their right mind ever said, ah yes, the way Sombra held down right click to not allow me to play the video game, that was a very fun encounter. While I do admit that I'm the reason for many a Sombra switch in my own games, because a man can only be solo ulted so often before they snap, I have to say that there is a reason for my repeated turn to the dark side as well. A reason you will find on our last episode. With the introduction of a brand new Sigma skin came not only the desire to want to obtain a new cosmetic, but also the wish to earn it. Of course, just winning 9 games was way too easy, so I decided that a suitable challenge would be trying to unlock that skin by using a hero that I've next to no experience playing, Sigma himself. My very first game in the Sigma Maestro challenge put me up against Bella the Sombra player, and let me tell you, I was not having a good time. But if there's one thing I'm not, it's a quitter. While I'm not going to spoil the result of that match, I will tell you that following that episode, I have successfully obtained Sigma's new skin without resorting to playing another character. No matter how much my duo begged me to switch, I had set myself a challenge and I was determined to complete it. And since I have achieved my goal, it is time for some Karmic retribution. That Sombra-filled matchup left me with a sour taste in my mouth, and the only way to remove it was by tasting the sweet nectar that is playing Sombra myself. The last time we decided to play the fun police, we were targeting a very specific player that shan't be granted the pleasure that is playing the video game. But this time, our goal is not quite that noble. Rather than targeting somebody who specifically chose to play a hero that also isn't fun to play against, our goal is to cause as much havoc as humanly possible. Balls rolling around, I stop those. Farah hugging a cloud, I drop those. Roadhog chasing me down to try and stop my hacking spree, I dodge those. My god, can you imagine how confused that guy must be? Anyway, point being, if there is a hero that relies on their abilities to function, you can be certain that I was on their tail. And if that means following up a hack with an EMP, then by Jeff, consider it done. Though my favorite part here is the fact that the bull just decided to run away once the EMP wore off, subsequently feeding the Baptiste that saved his life to the wolves. I know how that feels. Considering I know how that feels, what do you think is going to happen when I encounter a lonely Zenyatta player in the backline? Am I going to A, solo EMP him, B, use my ultimate specifically on him, or C, ask him to smash that like button? Leave your vote down in the comment section below.
I'm so sorry.
Listen, those of you who know me also know that I go to great lengths to support my fellow Zenyatta players, but eventually it gets frustrating to see the enemies always peel for each other while I am left inspecting the floor. So if I don't get to have fun playing Zenyatta, neither does that guy. But I'm not all bad, I promise. I mean, as much as I'm denying the enemy team the luxury of being able to use their abilities, I'm also very selflessly handing out POTGs to my own teammates who decide to follow up on it. And it is moments like these that you come across like-minded players who, just like yourself, devote themselves to screwing over the red team as much as possible. Our story today takes place on Iconwalds. Funky name pronunciations aside, being a hybrid game mode, you can be certain that I'm feeling quite at home on this map. And as much as I have to wonder why the heck Jeff decided to pick a name that is impossible to pronounce properly for anyone outside of Germany, none of that takes away from how much I love playing on this map. While my heritage would allow me to tell you how to actually pronounce it, I'm not going to stop butchering that name until Blizzard finally stops bastardizing my culture. I mean, for Jeff's sake, this skin is literally named after our national animal, and yet there's no eagle to be found. And I'm sorry, but this is not how you pronounce that name.
Bro, don't even get me started on the recipes in the Overwatch cookbook.
Either way, none of that matters now because the only thing that does matter is making the red team regret ever queuing into our lobby. And considering the fact that they decide to roll out with a Zenyatta, it looks like I'm going to have a field day. Between me on Sombra, Kahiko on Brig, and what is most assuredly going to turn out to be a DPS Moira, our squad was definitely on the same page about what is going to happen in this match. As the attackers leap towards the objective, I was looking for a target and a good opportunity to strike. The enemy Zenyatta may feel comfortable now, but all that is going to change once I decide to strike from the shadows. The first engagement, even as a Sombra, is always meant to test the waters. What kind of team am I facing? How do they react to this kind of play? Are they confident at aiming? I may not have succeeded in obtaining an elimination, but this was merely the beginning. I'm about to live in that Zenyatta's head, and I'm most assuredly not planning to pay rent. The distance between my translocator and their backline was fairly negligible, allowing me to come back and harass the supports time and time again. A repeated backline poking took away a lot of their attention, meaning that while they were busy fending me off, their frontline would crumble due to a lack of healing. Even without a massive kill streak, everything was going fairly well so far, but when I returned to annoy them some more, I found that my get out of jail free card had been destroyed mid-engagement. I hadn't realized that the mini health pack room was turned into a battleground with my translocator becoming a casualty, and with no means of escape at the ready, I would fall victim to the support line that I was trying to harass. The attacker's front line would finally be granted the undivided attention of their supports, meaning that it was time for the rest of my team to pick up the slack while I was respawning. At this point, all I could do is hope that they don't collapse under the pressure. As I rushed out of spawn to come to the assistance of my team, I couldn't help but feel embarrassed about the rookie mistake I made. How could I be so foolish as to leaving my translocator in plain sight? I had to hurry back to the choke point before that misspike cost us more than just my life. All I needed was a bit more time to cover the distance, and my Sigma would be the one to grant my wish. To stop the red team in their tracks, he uses gravitic flux in the choke point and forced the enemy Zenyatta to blow his transcendance. The robot monk having used his ultimate meant go time for my EMP to crush their hopes of getting past the choke. Without being able to use their defensive abilities, my Zarya's Graviton Surge will prove to be more lethal than the gravitic flux they had just survived. No fun also meant no survivors, leading us to aggressively push towards their spawn to make sure that none of them lived to tell the tale. We had successfully stabilized our position, but to make sure that we continued to dominate, I had to try and keep them on the respawn train. Their low HP Zarya was an easy target to clean up, but when I saw that their Zenyatta was coming out of spawn to challenge me, I felt it was necessary to teach him a lesson. So far in this game, I have merely been an annoyance to him, since his Ana was determined to keep him alive no matter how often I tried to go for an assassination. My ability to see low HP targets was on par with his Discord orb, allowing him to know my exact location. But the difference in hitbox sizes is what ultimately would dictate the victory of this 1v1. Desperation began to set into the minds of the attackers as an offensive bastion pick was meant to be the saving grace that keeps him in the game. My backline assaults have finally borne fruit, since it prompted most of their team to stop what they're doing to try and make sure I can't further harass their supports. As noble of a goal as that may be, it also left their bastion feeling completely defenseless, allowing our Reaper to add yet another head to his collection. The main tank realized that drastic measures had to be taken if they want to avoid this being turned into a first point full hold, but the means by which he can create space are fairly limited. He popped his ultimate to first try and disrupt our front line, then peel for their backline, and ultimately, in an act of sheer desperation, he decided to leap towards the objective to force us to contest it. Come on, just a bit more. Here we go. The unfortunate part for him is that our Reaper had seen this play coming miles away, meaning that a simple shadow step was enough to invalidate most of his effort. Well, that is what... As I was chasing down the enemy Lucio, I started to think about how allowing them to cap the first point may be even more BM than just outright full holding. Wouldn't it be even more demoralizing to think that you have a shot at winning, just to then continue getting spawn camped? My mind wandered in strange directions of what I could only assume was the result of playing way too much DPS. Ultimate after ultimate and push after push would see us coming out ahead of each and every engagement. If I didn't know any better, I'd almost think that we are the attacking team, considering how much time we spent around that spawn room. But to my surprise, we hadn't extinguished the flame of defiance just yet. The enemy Genji had positioned himself very sneakily to force me to use my translocator, the location of which was still very far away from the choke since we haven't been losing any fights. I had a long ways to go to return to the fight once again, which created an opportunity for the red team to strike back. With a nanoblade in hand, LG7 was tearing through our front line, and that was the play they needed to finally allow them to effectively leave their spawn. Meanwhile in the card, Headhunter continued to stall out the opposition to make sure we didn't have to forsake the choke point again, but when the enemy Widowmaker returned, that stall would come to a swift end. With our forces staggering onto the objective, the attackers were in a prime position to group up and eliminate us in one fell swoop. A chance they wouldn't want to miss out on as they invested their ultimates to make sure that the age of spawn camping was finally over. But we weren't so easily beaten. I wouldn't allow my confidence to slip again, even in the face of disgusting misplays, because I still had a duty to fulfill. Just like my tanks kept us in the game after we lost the first point, it was now in my hands to allow us to stop the enemies before they advanced too far. My translocator was boldly placed right below the enemies to make sure I can come back and stall for as much time as possible. And just like my Sigma had bought me the time to come back with a game-changing EMP, I had done the same for him as he flanked the opposition to take to the skies for another gravitic flux. Playtime was over as Mini and I comboed for another EMP graviton that would make for the final nail in the coffin. Our eliminations were just staggered enough with only 30 seconds left on the clock that the attackers would not be able to properly regroup, let alone combine their ultimates. For one last time in this match, we planted our no fun allowed flag on the ground by pushing towards their spawn and crushing any hopes for a last second comeback. The enemy Genji was the only one able to dodge us and try to make a play by using Dragon Blades, but at this point you could tell their spirits were broken and the card would remain untouched. Victory was ours, but more importantly than that, our team made sure that if we cannot have fun, neither can the enemies. The end. I will be the first to admit that there are a lot of bold claims I've made in my time playing Overwatch. One of the funny things about this game is that whatever hero you deem to be overpowered or barely even an inconvenience, it always depends on what characters you like to play. When I suggested that the vast majority of people probably hate Sombra because of her literally being designed to not allow you to play the video game, you know what a lot of you guys were told it with? Bastion? Yep. unironically, Bastion. While I'm not planning to devote an entire episode to the PTSD robot, if the internet is anything to go by, it seems like even more players hate Brigitte over heroes like Sombra and Bastion. Now, of course, complaints of that nature are often coming from the competitive community and the fact that Brig has been a crucial part of the meta for a very, very long time. But much like a lot of you guys say that you don't care about Sombra and Doomfist as much as I do, personally, I don't actually hate Brig as much as the competitive community. As a Zenyatta main, provided my character was actually playable, I don't often have a very hard time dealing with the shield maiden. Even if she runs at me using her ultimate, a few well-placed orbs are usually enough to take her down. Naturally, I recognize that not every character in the game has access to that level of burst damage, but let's also not forget that not every character has a hitbox the size of a moon. So as far as I'm concerned, you can go cry your beta damage Terios elsewhere. I mean, it's not like I don't understand why particularly DPS players hate playing against that character, especially when you do hilarious things like 1v1ing a Dragon Blade in Genji and actually coming out victorious. But at the same time, if it's okay for their mere existence to force me off of my favorite hero, then I'm definitely not feeling bad about switching to Brig and beating them into a pulp. At this point, you're the one that has awakened the beast. All I wanted to do is play Zenyatta, but no, you had to go and play fun characters like Doomfist and Sombra. Do you actually, in all seriousness, without the faintest hint of meme in your mind, think that at that point I will take pity upon your pathetic existence? Wow, playing Brig really does change you, doesn't it? Anyway, there is a good reason for my current crusade against the DPS category and all the wondrous DLC characters that have been added to that roster. So before they hit Brig with yet another nerf hammer, I decided to annoy some DPS players one last time, meaning we continue what we started on our last episode. After having greatly suffered in the tank role, it was time to put the scales of judgment back into balance, and the best way to achieve that was via means of petty revenge. What better hero to deliver my vengeance than the one that was previously used against me? There is a point in every man's life playing Overwatch where victory becomes of secondary concern over their desire to want to prove a point. Said point being, if I can't have fun, neither can you. The sheer presence of my Sombra pick caused a lot of my enemies to grant me more respect than I realistically had any right to demand. But yet again, here I stand proving that holding right click is superior to any of their sad attempts of using skill. But as I've been farming Hammond players time and time again, much like they harassed me when I was playing Zenyatta, I came to the realization that I was spending a lot of time bullying tanks and not so much time annoying DPS players. And for some reason, it's far more tilting to them to die to Brigitte than being denied access to their hero's abilities. But hey, if that's what it takes to get my revenge, then back to the support role I go. Now let me tell you, as a Brigitte player, you have no fear. Okay, maybe the odd Junkrat or Farah pick, but besides that, you are pretty much as busted as they come. You know how, as kids on the playground, you'd be like, I got you, you're it now, but everyone always had that one friend that'll be like, nah, you only graced my shirt, doesn't count. That is pretty much the hero you are playing, because every time that any other character would end up flat on their face, you just continue to run at the enemies with reckless abandon. People say that playing Brig is no fun, but what could be more fun than becoming a near unkillable demigod every time you hit the Q button? And I know that a lot of you expected this episode to be about Zenyatta, considering Jeff is currently thinking about buffing him, but we shall not return to the spawn until I have my vengeance. So tape down those W keys and get ready to hold M1, because our story today takes place on Route 66. Now, before I go ranting about whether or not I like this map, I think I should highlight that I genuinely believe it to be really well designed. But do you ever just completely at random feel negatively about a map in this game solely based on your win rate? If I'm trying to assess it objectively, I really believe that this is one of the better maps in Overwatch. But for some reason, I can't help dreading the idea of playing on it just because I saw the defeat screen so very often on here. But whether I like it or not, we haven't had an episode on Route 66 in a while, and as such, it is time to storm out the gates and get this payload on the road. The defenders tactically positioned themselves to make use of the high ground and opted to not allow us to get on the card for free. Of course, my team was ready for that sort of challenge as we confidently marched up the ramp and pushed the enemies back into the dirt where they belonged. This was exactly the type of teamfight our composition excels at, fighting our opponents toe-to-toe until one side comes out victorious. Our initial goal, however, was merely the denial of high ground as we waited for the payload to continue moving forward. The enemy Ashe decided that no tricks were necessary as she drew first blood on our McCree, though that elimination did come at the cost of her own life. Their bodies, however, would be filled with life once again as our and their Mercy decided to undo the damage to have both of our teams fight each other at full strength. As the payload approached the first choke point around the corner, Reinhardt and I aggressively pushed on forward to make sure that the enemies can't get comfortable and set up another high ground defense. Habits and I were on the same page as we chased down their squishies as a sign of sheer disrespect. Neither their Ashe nor their Genji would get out alive, and we were confident that with an opening teamfight such as that, winning this game would be no trouble at all. But little did we know that, while we had been marching towards the enemy spawn, Archetype the Hammond player was busy stalling out the payload, thusly negating a lot of the benefits we thought we created by pushing up. But we cannot show our backs to the enemies, for such a retreat would turn the hunters into the prey. And as I watched Habits get flattened by the opposing Reinhardt, I decided that drastic measures had to be taken. I recklessly tossed my body at the opposition, hoping that I could buy Habits enough time to respawn and bring his ultimate to the front line. But despite popular belief, Brigitte cannot actually take on the entire enemy team on her own, and as such, I found myself eliminated. While my Hammond's minefield perfectly made use of the space I had created to deny entry to the payload, it only took one player being able to bypass that roadblock to stop our advance. Their Genji's nanoblade would prove to be just what they needed to invalidate most of our effort, as our entire team would get wiped out and had to go back to the drawing board. The defenders have successfully taken control of the cart with a clean wipe, allowing them to position however they desired. Coming up with a plan of attack now would certainly not be easy, but we were determined to take back what was rightfully ours. After having tasted defeat by the hands of the enemy Genji, our team decided that the best plan of attack was to mimic what already worked for the opposition. A swift counterattack was in order as Rodan dashed up into the sky, ready to deliver bloody vengeance. Well, let me stop you right here. While some of you might assume that a simple Dragon Blade will be enough to reclaim the payload, I can't help but highlight the fact that Rodan decided to engage this team fight using his ultimate. The fact that this was how the fight started also meant that every single player on the enemy team had access to every single one of their cooldowns. As such, Rodan's attempt of bringing honor to the attacking team would be met by more than just one Uno reverse card, utterly obliterating him at any chance of getting a kill. That misplay left the rest of us in a very awkward spot as we scrambled to get out and tried to attempt a quick reset. But the blue team was very persistent in their effort of taking me out, and broken character or not, there was no chance for me to arrive at the safety of my spawn room. Our second support decided to tuck tail, creating even more problems that we had yet to find solutions for. Thankfully, the defenders began to get overzealous, allowing my respawning teammates to punish the enemy Reinhardt for getting a little too aggressive. Even without a second support, we couldn't allow that elimination to go to waste, so whatever was left of our team marched on forward to butt heads with the defenders once again. Hammond and Winston would dive into the enemy backline for a combo Goomba stomp on the opposing Ana, and eventually also get rid of their Genji. Meanwhile, the payload, I could acquire my ultimate by peeling for our McCree, and of course I smashed that Q button immediately to join my front line and ensure that we finally captured this first point. Realizing what he was up against, the enemy Reinhardt barely even put up a fight to stop me. Gnome the Ashe player, on the other hand, had still some fight in them left, lining up a shot to take me out, but obviously was not aware of the fact that my McCree was still alive and well on the payload. At last, we would finally be able to claim the first checkpoint, but what awaited us on the other side was even more hardship. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, at that point I was just a designated payload bodyguard. All I really did was occasionally whip-shotting the odd enemy tank to get my Inspire going, while the rest of my team was out there doing just work. Habits had successfully tickled the enemy Genji into an early grave before primal raging, and when he got hit by a sleep dart, Hammond was tag teaming in to keep the enemies busy. It was quite the thing of beauty in watching this tank duo engage and disengage, forcing crucial CDs and even ultimates on the opposition, despite the fact that both of their supports were nowhere near them. Eventually I decided that I wanted to join in on the fun, and it was in that moment that Archetype dropped onto the payload with a minefield, eliminating my poor Ana while also falling himself. The lack of healing had eventually caught up to my tanks as well, meaning that the only survivors were my McCree and yours truly. The enemy Reinhardt was determined to send every last attacker back to the spawn room, going as far as to not only charge my McCree, but even solo ult him. It is in moments like these that your body moves before you can even think. One of my teammates was in trouble and I was the only one around who could still save him. As a spur of the moment reaction, I tossed him a healing pack before rolling out towards him and making sure that my whip shot strikes true to deny the killing blow. This may have been the closest save I have ever pulled off, and I realized that more than wanting to annoy the enemies, I really just wanted to help my team. After all, I'm a support player at heart. It was in that very moment that I knew I had to stop my crusade and get back in touch with my roots. I cannot allow hatred to take over and turn me into what I hated the most: a DPS player. Dude, I swear somebody's gonna take offense to that. Speaking of DPS... Sadly, it just wasn't meant to be that easy. As much as you might think that Brig is a difficult hero to deal with, considering the presence of more than just one Hammond and Doomfist, I was not the only one playing a broken character. The enemy hamster continued to stall the payload, and just like on point A, the timely use of a number of ultimate abilities would drive home the fact that spawn camping isn't always the solution. That doesn't mean that we didn't try to spawn camp them again, but considering we didn't win the game on the back of that, we didn't have a choice but to approach the last team fight with a different plan of attack. That plan included the pressing of many Q buttons, but as we approached the objective, we were intercepted by a Doomfist coming from the top ropes. Wait a second, what? Well, as it turns out, we, C9'd the cart. Listen, I'm not here to throw shade at my tanks who decide to hard eat into the enemy backline rather than touching the card, especially because I spent as much time spawn camping in this match as they did. At the end of the day, victory or not, this match helped me finding the righteous path once again. Done other days of hard locking Sombra to tilt the enemy team into madness, and I will no longer play Brig, except with the explicit purpose of helping out my team. The end. If there was ever a hero in Overwatch that deserves his time in the spotlight, it would be Zenyatta. Ever since his introduction to the game, he was kind of there. Like, don't get me wrong, he was prominently featured in the GOATS meta, and I longingly remember the days where a hyper-lethal Zenyatta-Lucio composition was actually viable. Point being, while there have been reasons to run Zenyatta, he never broadly took over the meta to the extent that, for example, Mercy did. And that's a shame, because with a damage output twice as high as your average DPS player and intriguing character design, and the fact that you can slay people by tossing bulls at them, Zenyatta really would be a prime candidate to make for many people's main hero. If only there wasn't one glaring issue. His hitbox. Don't let any of these meta experts out there fool you. Zenyatta's viability is not at all tied to his damage output, lack of mobility, or non-existent sustain. Frankly, I do think he was fairly well designed in that regard. Every hero should have a weakness you can exploit, and if you want to have a powerful off support that adds to your team's lethality while featuring a strong defensive ultimate, then forsaking something like mobility or sustain is a fair trade-off. What isn't fair is that you can eliminate him by simply breathing in his general direction. Since he decided that floating was his preferred mode of transportation and his overblown hitbox literally does not allow for pallets to miss him, he ends up making for a bullet magnet in more than one sense. This character is more fragile than my freaking ego, and I feel like that says a lot. But fear not, children, because our Lord and Savior Jeff Kaplan has the solution. More damage! Rather than giving Zenyatta a sensible amount of survivability, the Overwatch devs figured it was a better idea to make everyone who tries to face him feel like their hitboxes are broken as well. Eye for an eye, as they like to say, the time of reckoning is finally upon us. We have doubled down on the glass cannon build, and I will gladly remind the red team of just how lethal Zenyatta can be. But not until we have covered what happened on our last episode. We had finally arrived at the finale of our Fun Police saga, and what better way to end it than playing Brigitte before she got nerfed. While terrorizing DPS players certainly was fun, that game showed me that more than wanting to become a nuisance to the enemy team, I wanted to be a pillar for my own. After all, this is Overwatch. We're here to play heroes, and there's nothing more heroic than helping out your team. But don't forget that there's more than one way to achieve that, and Zenyatta's here to show you how. What better choice is there to teach you the art of support warfare than Zen, a hero so inherently skillful that every single shot is taken with the uttermost intent. This character represents the apex of skill in Overwatch, a culmination of mechanical prowess, intellectual superiority, and flawless positioning. To be a good Zenyatta player means you have mastered every single aspect of this game. Take it from me, a YouTube content creator with no known biases towards any of the characters in this game. I mean, it's not like I'm using Zenyatta as a storytelling stand-in for my videos or anything. That would be ridiculous. As far as the community is concerned, a lot of players are holding heroes like Widowmaker in high regard for taking a ton of skill, but what if I told you that I am dueling Widowmakers on a regular? Of course, their DPS ego does not allow them to admit defeat to a lowly support, but you and I both know that Zenyatta is just a DPS with a support alibi. Though I would lie if I said that I didn't take any pleasure from knocking them down a peg. How can you even be mad about dying to a Zenyatta? But there is a bit of a problem. All these wonderful clips I've shown you so far, yeah, those have been recorded before the Zenyatta buff went live. And since the buff doesn't at all address why he's kind of miserable to play against anyone who even remotely knows what they are doing, I'm not too sure that anything is going to change. I mean, I guess I can do what I was already good at, even more gooder. Well, all this is speculation, and I suppose the only way to find out is by actually jumping into a match. Which means that our story today brings us back to Blizzard World. Unlike Route 66, which reminds me of constant defeat, Blizzard World actually invokes a lot of very positive memories. Of course, this map is not without its fault, but there's still a lot of fun to be had here. It's hard to be upset about this being Jeff's map of choice for my Zenyatta comeback, knowing that it could have been something like Volskaya Industries. As such, I gladly embrace the opportunity to play on a decent hybrid map to prove my worth and run this buff through its paces. The sight of defenders on high ground without the protection of a barrier or two may be unsettling to many of you, but to us, the increase in lethality made for a welcome addition. While the enemy Genji tried to poke us off of our elevated ground with the help of a pocket mercy, Fred, the Doomfist player, tried to go for a bit more of a flanking approach. Of course, I saw right through that play and knew he was coming for us, deciding that a trial by fire was the best way to find out if that damage buff was any useful. Fred was not expecting to get flanked while flanking, finding himself eliminated before being able to make use of his character's kit. Thankfully for him, Tetsuo the Mercy player scraped him off the ground to get a shot at redemption. Now fully aware of his opponent, Fred made an attempt to engage me again, but the outcome didn't change. While I was contemplating whether that double victory came as a result of my competence or Fred's incompetence, the other members of my team were mopping the floor with the opposition, promptly sending them back to their spawn room. The enemy Doomfist just was not meant to be allowed to take a break, taking an orb volley to the face as he tried to engage, promptly causing him to hide behind a wall. Where I am lacking the mobility to follow up on that damage, the rest of my team decided to not allow the Nigerian warrior to recover, hunting him down like the off-meta trash pick that he is supposed to be. Mercy may have revived him once again, but it was clear that Fred was in a state of shock. At this point, I was already a big fan of my Hammond, who diligently followed up on my Discord orbs as he was running circles around the enemies who seemingly were unable to stop him. Speaking of things you can't stop, despite getting pre-healed by my Ana as well as having my entire team turn around to peel for me, hitbox magic would work its wonders and delete me off the map without any chance for counterplay. Fred has given his life in the process, sure, but it reminded me that an increased damage output is not a flat-out solution to all of Zenyatta's problems. Thankfully, I had nothing to worry about, because even without my Discord orb leading the charge, my team managed to hang in there and make sure we didn't immediately lose the objective. After I respawned, attackers and defenders alike had some crucial ultimates at their disposal, ultimates that the attackers wanted to make use of before they lost the upper hand. But there I was, putting their chances for victory at risk again with a calculated headshot on the enemy Genji. His Ana had to give him a nano boost just to keep him alive, but little did he know that I had an ultimate of my own. The moment he dashed into me, I transcended into a realm of intellectual superiority, denying the dash reset and thusly causing him to fall into the water. At the same time, we have been hitting the opposition with a nanoblade of our own, taking heads in quick succession and really driving home the fact that this objective was ours for good. Our steadfast defense remained unbroken as the attackers were cleanly sliced into bite-sized pieces. I was off to a great start on my first Zenyatta game after the buff, but we shouldn't underestimate the attackers' resolve. Because as we all know, if there's one thing that's always on the table in Overwatch, it's a comeback. Every team deserves a shot at redemption, and after a crushing defeat during the last team fight, the attackers decided it was about time for theirs. The red team's opening playstyle Fred fruitlessly tried to get into a beneficial position, and wasn't it for his get-out-of-jail-free ultimate, would have been punished for his lackluster gameplay again. But who even needs to put a modicum of effort into their gameplay when you can just get a free kill before once again feeding your brains out? But at that point, the enemy Doomfist was the least of our concerns, as the opposing tanks cleaved their way through AZ's minefield. The red team seemed very angry about the course this match has taken so far, deciding that the only way to gain control of the first point was by annihilating our tank line. And you know what? They made a good point. Most of our team adapted a very evasive playstyle that saw our tanks function as, well, just really fat DPS heroes. So long that AZ and Polish were alive to disrupt the lineup, it's like we were fighting the enemies with 5 DPS. And once both of them were taken care of, our chances to hold onto the objective grew very slim. Now that the red team successfully assembled on the objective, they were in a position where they could dictate the pace of the next team fight. I made an attempt to get a couple cheeky eliminations to combat their ever-increasing momentum, but their Zarya was perceptive enough to not only spot me, but also chase me away. Thankfully, my Ana was there to keep me healthy, and while I'm fairly certain that the enemy Zarya felt very smug about forcing me to disengage, my Roadhog showed up behind her in true point me at the guy that bullied you fashion. The eliminations that Roadhog and I accumulated ended up actually making a big difference, as our team was fully prepared to take a fight in the choke point against an opponent that was bleeding manpower left, right, and center. What little high ground was left at the enemy's disposal turned into a death trap, thanks to my onslaught of Discord orbs and the sniping prowess of my Ana. AZ, Finch, and I have been working like a well-oiled machine, while Polish continued being a disruptive force of nature. The red team may have claimed the objective, but that does not mean that we are planning to let them deliver it. The ferocity of our gameplay knew no limits, and what started off as a choke point hold was now turned into an outright spawn camp. After having been trapped on their spawn for close to a minute, the enemy team made the executive decision to swap some heroes. An increase in mobility for their entire composition meant that their chances of removing me and my pesky Discord orbs increased. But if you think that I won't build Transcendence just to save my own skin, then surely you must be new to the channel and should consider hitting that subscribe button.
Heck, smash that like button as well while you're at it.
Of course, Winston tried to dive me once again after my Transcendence faded, but he grossly underestimated my team's desire to keep me alive. The Monkey Mans found himself eliminated, though it wouldn't take long for their Mercy to show up and allow him to give that whole diving business another crack. I'm not entirely sure if the enemies genuinely believed me to be the biggest problem on our team, or if they were merely trying to kill anybody at all and figured that targeting a low mobility support with the hitbox the size of a tank gave them the best chance for success. But despite all odds, I survived every and any attempt they made to take me out. We continued to keep our eyes focused on the high ground, taking out anybody foolish enough to peek us, and while the cart began making slight advances towards the choke point, we were still firmly in control. Any flanking attempts the enemy team made were immediately shut down by my Roadhog, and with the enemy Doomfist taken out, I figured that I could be so bold as to go in a flank myself. Of course, I had to clean up the front line first, but once that was taken care of, I decided to go and make sure that Hammond can continue doing Hammond things. Just look at how incredibly well our team was playing together. While I was trying to make a point for if Jeff didn't want Zenyatta to be a flanker, he would have given him footsteps, my Roadhog was right there keeping me safe from any diving annoyances. I doubled down on my flank but had to take cover when my HP fell dangerously low, and just when I found myself in a life or death type of 1v1 with the enemy Ana, AZ rolled up to make sure that I am the one who comes out victorious. It isn't often that I am blessed with a team that not only decides to defend each other and play together, but one that goes as far as covering for each other's feeding. I had no right to be anywhere near the enemy spawn, but there I was, getting back completely unscathed thanks to my amazing teammates. But playtime was over when a nano boosted Winston decided that if they can't take out the robot monk, then they're going to target the old lady instead. Finch used his nano boost on our Genji with his dying breath, meaning that it was now Murloc Ninja's duty to make sure that losing our main support was not something the enemy team could capitalize on. And the best way to achieve that was by pushing them back into their spawn. While my healing orb would have not been the difference between Finch falling or surviving, I wouldn't just allow that Winston to get away with that assassination. It would be my hand that delivers the final blow to avenge my Ana, but rather than mourning the fallen, I had to make sure to keep the rest of my team alive since I was the only support we had left. AZ was playing a dangerous game while continuously operating behind enemy lines, and eventually the red team was sick and tired of it. Hammond was the recipient of a solo graph, but considering I owed him my life, I was not about to just watch him die. A solo ult would be answered with another solo ult, allowing the both of us to survive and return to the rest of our team. Oh yeah, you might be wondering what Fred has been doing this entire time. Well, let's just say that my Roadhog made sure that it didn't end up being a problem. With only 30 seconds left on the clock, the fight surrounding the objective became more and more fierce. The attackers were determined to use any available resources to make for a final push so that they would be allowed to enjoy the entire beauty of this map rather than just their spawn room. Throwing caution out the window, Fred decided to go for a bold dive into our backline but found himself intercepted by a sleep dart. His get out of jail free card may have allowed him to get a free kill last time, but now his feeding would not be rewarded. Though utterly unsuccessful in the diving department, that feeding act created space that the remaining attackers could make use of, and thanks to the power of a multitude of ultimate abilities, the cart kept moving forward. I may have said earlier that a comeback is always on the table in Overwatch, but don't forget the law of ult-equivalent exchange. If they have all these ultimates at their disposal, that means we also had some to fight back. All it took was one respawn wave, the smashing of many Q buttons, and ultimately, victory was ours. The end. Have you ever heard of the saying, be careful what you wish for? Much like a malicious genie, Blizzard Entertainment decided to grant our wishes in a bit more of a literal sense than we expected. When we collectively cried out for the destruction of the double shield meta, Jeff descended from the heavens and told us, so you don't like barriers, huh? Well, I can fix that. Rather than just nerfing the most prolific culprits of the double barrier meta, Jeff decided to simply nerf all of them. And with that, the dawn of a new meta was upon us. It became obvious that we had grown complacent in our means of combat, relying too heavily on barriers to keep us safe. It was also now that we realized how much the maps in this game have been designed with barriers in mind. And now that we got none of them to hide behind, snipers and flankers begin reigning supreme. And when I say flankers, I'm talking about the fat variety. Shield tanks were no longer good enough to protect us from Valorant players one-tricking Widowmaker, so our only hope for survival was the flanking Roadhog. It is a thankless job, but somebody had to do it. When we look back at this period in Overwatch history, we're going to talk about how overpowered Roadhog Roadhog was, but we're probably not going to talk about how he was the last bastion of defense against the onslaught of hit-scan heroes that were now revealed to be completely busted. Listen, you and I both know that the snipers in the red team are religiously better than the ones in the blue team, so if we want them taken care of, we have to take matters into our own hands. And if there's one thing that tilts me off the face of this planet during this meta, it's mercy-pocketed hit-scan players. So you can be certain that I will use every tool available to me to make sure they can't ruin our fun any longer. Speaking of things that are fun, let's talk about what happened on our last episode. Jeff and the Overwatch development team have granted me a rare blessing in the form of a Zenyatta buff, and with the robot monk being my favorite hero of choice, I would not miss out on an opportunity to find out if he was actually playable now. As much as an increased damage output allowed me to win 1v1 that otherwise would see me inspecting the floor, unfortunately that buff did not come bundled with a much needed fix to Zen's hitbox. But our favorite DPS in disguise of a support was not the only hero that received Kaplan's blessing, because much like Zenyatta pretends to be a healer, Roadhog pretends to be a tank. So it was only fitting that the same patch that buffed Zen also buffed the pig. But the wheels of balance move quickly these days, so if I want to make use of Roadhog's currently broken state, I have to hurry up and get into the game. Heck, for all I know, he might already be nerfed again by the time this video goes live. Roadhog is the great equalizer in this meta, a hero that does not distinguish between tank, support, and DPS, for he is capable of filling every single slot. For every Hammond that thinks he can just roll into your team like the annoying rodent he is, there is a hog waiting to blow his ultimate. For every Widowmaker that thinks they just get to chill in the backline, there is a flanking Roadhog coming from the top ropes to put them back in their place. And for every Lucio that is just there to vibe, there's a hook that was totally meant to hit somebody else. Listen, I know our time is limited here and I'm very aware of our community's inherent dislike for this meta, but I will never stop loving the fact that I can just take out Mercies and their accompanying hit-scan duos all on my own, instead of having to shout at my team to turn on their monitors. With that knowledge in mind, let's see if I can shake off my Roadhog rust and present an episode on a map that I believe we have never featured before. That's right, my friends, our story today takes place on Dorado. I have failed many times in my attempts of creating a story-worthy encounter on this map, but if there was ever a time to make it happen, it would be during the flanking meta. The defenders had no idea what kind of carnage they were about to walk into, and I was there to make sure that this was not the last time they ran out of spawn. But considering the fact that I'm on uncharted territory when it comes to telling a story on this map, I was really glad about having brought some reinforcements. Delphi would be my Widowmaker of choice, and between the two of us, there was no shortage of confidence. But enough foreshadowing for now, it's time to open the gates and begin escorting the objective. Delphi would lose no time when it came to setting the pace for this match, styling on the opposing Ashe with a 360 jump shot and thusly proving my point about the red snipers being superior to the blue ones. Hey, I don't get to choose the replay colors, and apparently being on the attacking team means we are now the red team. But if that means that our Widowmaker dominates in the sniper battle, then I'm not gonna complain. The enemy Mercy may have rezzed that opening pick, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because that meant there's no coming back for their Sigma as he fell victim to the yoinkening. Oh yeah, and Delphi just popped their Ashe again as soon as he was given the opportunity. Breaking through the first choke point on Dorado is usually quite difficult, so being up 2 players was definitely a good start to say the least. But the enemy Roadhog player, in true flank hog fashion, tried to salvage their first point hold by tossing out his hook. Delphi was doing such a good job dominating the opposing hit scan that I figured I had no choice but to establish my own dominance by smacking player the Roadhog player back to his spawn. Ion figured that we should reinforce our position of power by pushing into the enemy spawn, and while landing shots did not seem to be his strong suit, I can certainly get behind that idea. The cart made free progress through the choke and was rapidly approaching the first capture point, meaning that whatever the defenders were planning to do, they had to hurry up and do it quickly. As comical as it is that my hook passed through their hulking Roadhog and instead latched onto the slender robot ninja, what wasn't funny was the fact that this put me in mortal danger. I immediately tried to take a breather to keep myself alive, but I was now the center of attention with loads of crowd control and damage coming my way. Thankfully, Darkstone the Sigma player came back in the nick of time to swap places with me so that Toshi could top me off. In a desperate act of defiance, I tried to keep the defenders away from the objective and secure the map, but player connected a maximum range hook that cancelled my ultimates. He may have thought that I was now stuck with him, but in actuality, he was stuck with me. And while I was lacking the ammunition to follow up on the hook I landed, Darkstone uses unlimited supply of balls to finish off what I started. There is no greater feeling than waltzing towards a lonely Ashe player that lost their pocket mercy in this meta, and you can be certain that I savored every moment of this. The defenders had made a respectable effort to contest the objective, but considering our strong opening, it was only natural that they lost. But I'm not one to underestimate an opponent, so let's see if they can get their act together before we stomp them into the ground. While I would have loved to join my comrades in the front line to dish out yet unprecedented amounts of damage, somebody had to escort the objective, and that somebody ended up being me. Thankfully, we had Delphi push up with the rest of our team to hold the sightlines and make sure that we can further build on our advantage. The enemy Roadhog player had to navigate a sea of sniper bullets in his effort to get into a beneficial position, but there was no way in heck he could acquire high ground control without the support of a barrier. Though we somehow managed to catch our Mercy off guard, who presumably was playing with her game audio turned off. Our positional advantage began to crumble when the enemy Genji returned from the spawn room to not only have Delphi pop his own noggin, but also wipe the floor with our soldier. It was that moment of vulnerability that allowed the opposing Roadhog to complete his flank and take out our Zenyatta, which meant that we had officially lost enough players to warrant a tactical retreat. It would be foolish of us to try and fight at such a severe disadvantage, so we pulled back and regrouped in front of our spawn. Hilariously enough, the enemy Roadhog was trying to pull a sneaky on me, waiting for me to waste my hook before revealing his position. But much like on his previous hook, it wasn't I who was in danger. Better luck next time, buddy. Since there was no hook to worry about, Darkstone decided to shatter the enemy defenses by using Gravitic Flux. His confidence propelled him forward as he was ready to strike the finishing blow, but ended up slapped by the opposing Ana. But hey, that meant they had no sleep dot left for our soldier, who decided to use the crowd control free environment to annihilate every squishy he can see. And as a bit of a silver lining, Darkstone eventually got back on their Ana. The only problem now was the fact that we have acquired all these eliminations in very staggered fashion. By the time the card turned the corner, the Genji was already back and eliminated Delphi. Thankfully, our Mercy was there with a res, but we would not be able to reach the second checkpoint without a fight. I've been held on the second point many times before. Eager to not repeat the same mistake, I preemptively used my ultimate in an attempt of keeping the opposition away, but we couldn't cover enough distance by the time it ran out. And what better way to contest the objective than by summoning a tank that refuses to move while spraying the attackers down with an aimbot. Things began heating up when player used the whole hog of his own, and our Zenyatta smashed Transcendance in retaliation. What used to be an organized teamfight was now turned into a mosh pit of special effects vomit that didn't care about whether or not you understand what's happening. Their Genji returned with a Dragon Blade, trying to finally end this encounter, but Delphi was not about to just let him do as he pleases. While I found myself taking an involuntary nap thanks to an accidental boulder tossed in the general direction of the opposing Ana, I could return the favor and make her take a bit more of an extended rest. Though that didn't fix my problem, in which I was stuck in a graviton surge, eating more damage than I could reasonably digest. Things only got worse from here on out when the enemy Mercy revived their Genji, who was very keen on showing Delphi who's boss. But he isn't your average DPS player. In a stroke of genius, Delphi used his experience in Sea of Thieves to begin tucking in Overwatch, hiding literally in plain sight with the enemies not knowing where he disappeared to. I wish the rest of our team was equally brilliant, because Darkstone's gameplay began looking very shaky when he was left with the responsibility of making a crucial decision. Where it would have been smarter to go for another tactical retreat, his indecisiveness meant not only his own doom, but also the annihilation of those he vowed to protect. Though I want to highlight that our soldier most assuredly died fighting, slapping the pesky combat moth against the wall before falling himself. When I respawned, I was surprised to find out that Delphi had actually survived. I was trying to rush on over to his rescue and take out the enemy Tracer before she could get to the high ground. Sadly, the enemy Roadhog had already eliminated him by the time I made that decision, and now I was left in a very awkward position where I couldn't survive a 2v1 against the Hog and Genji. It was time to hit the reset button. None of our hero plays have been working out, so the only way we can still capture this objective was by actually playing as a team. Listen, I'm not a fan of that either, okay? But in order to get anywhere in this fight, we had to kill 2 flies with 1 hit. We knew that the enemy Roadhog was stomping his feet on the high ground, a position that we would love to take advantage of ourselves. And the tactical genius of Delphi knew no bounds as he grappled up on top for a 360 Venomite inversion move, allowing me to use player's moment of confusion to hook him off the high ground. Darkstone protected me from hooks and sleep thoughts while I used my whole hog in much more effective fashion than the first time around. The defenders made a desperate attempt to hold onto the objective despite having lost their Roadhog as well as their positional advantage. But there was no graviton surge powerful enough to stop us. Our team play allowed us to capture the second checkpoint, and now we're on the home stretch. We have succeeded in taking control of 2 checkpoints so far, but the greatest challenge was still ahead of us, for the 2CP on wheels nature of Dorado would rear its ugly head. Our best chance here was trying to keep the defenders on the stagger train, meaning that Delphi's infrasight will be an invaluable tool when it comes to chasing down the survivors. I began getting a feeling of deja vu when Darkstone decided that the elimination of the opposing Roadhog meant go time for his Gravitic Flux. Sadly, he didn't learn from his first blunder and once again failed to avoid Ana sightlines. The defenders were now retaliating with ultimates off their their own, hoping that a nanoblade will be the deciding factor in this teamfight. And while a well-timed transcendance could save us from the glowing weepstick, it wasn't enough to counter a respawning Roadhog aiming to wipe us out. But I wouldn't go down without a fight, resisting his ultimate and dropping down for a shotgun execution before his team eliminated me. Unfortunately, there was no momentum for us to gain. That team wipe meant back to the drawing board to find a way to break the 2 CP nature of this last point. And it didn't make it any easier that the defenders proved to be rather crafty. I mean, it was obvious to me that player tried to bait me to the edge to hook me off, but the fact that he was aware of that play meant that we'd have a hard time breaking through the flank. And an attack through the main gate proved to be just as difficult as the blue team systematically dismantled any attempt of getting into a strong position. But there was still hope. While my squishy teammates gathered up on main, I used a window of opportunity in which player was not actively holding the flank. An ultimate was a small price to pay for entry to the objective, and it was thanks to this decisive move that my team could roll up and sit their sweet patooties on the card. Of course, I was determined to keep up the momentum, but when the enemy Zarya answered my hook with a graviton surge, I knew bad things were about to happen. Their Genji pulled out a dragon blade, seeing as there was no transcendance to counter him this time, dismantling my team and sending us packing. Now here is where player decided pulling out the Season 2 strats, because after having been defeated on the flank last time, he decided to use the old emo trick to make sure that this time he can see me coming. But it wasn't I who was caught with his pants down. Delphi tried to play the Uno reverse card on player, and was it not for my hook, he would have been annihilated. Which makes it even more sad that he just walked into Delphi afterwards to one-shot him anyway. In preparation for my big brain play, I destroyed one of the railings, but when I successfully caught player by surprise, it turned out that I didn't break the right railings. While we were having our little squabble off to the side, my team got annihilated on main again, and now we were left with about a minute on the clock to figure out how we can break the stalemate. Little did I know that player did not take too kindly to my continued dominance over our little hog 1v1, so he took it upon himself to wait for me in my spawn and remove me from the equation entirely. With an ultimate. You can imagine my reaction when that happened, but at that point, there was nothing I could do to save myself. Delphi tried to avenge my death, and just like any big brain DPS player, he figured that using Deadeye in melee range of a Roadhog was a good idea. While we were having trouble even getting out of spawn, Darkstone decided to continue the meme and use his ultimate in a desperate attempt of becoming the hero that saved this match. But once again, this old man simply didn't learn. With barely a minute left on the clock and our teamfight track record in mind, a part of me had already given up on the idea of even trying to win the game. But if nothing else, I wouldn't just let player get away with waltzing into my spawn. I'd be the one who takes control of the high ground now, and naturally, I already knew player's style of hog. I knew he couldn't resist trying to challenge me, and I would answer in kind, but rather than tossing him off the map, I squeezed him into a corner to prolong his suffering and establish Roadhog dominance. Meanwhile on main, the defenders nuked most of my teammates with another nanoblade, causing us to expectedly lose the team fight. There was no coming back from the decisions we made at this point, and we would sink on the ship we decided to make our vessel. Delphi was trying to go for the content play of attempting to backcap the objective while the defenders nanobladed us to Narnia, but of course, we just weren't meant to get a happy end. I am well aware of the fact that I should be taking responsibility for the actions I have taken, and admit that my choice to repeatedly challenge the flank rather than playing with my team contributed to the fact that we lost this game. But instead, I only have one last thing to say. Team Diff. The end. Overwatch is currently in a very interesting state, to say the least. I mean, you and I, as much as the next guy, realize that people playing video games religiously will always have something to complain about when it comes to said video games. But this is the first time in years that I've seen people unanimously celebrate the current state of the game. As far as balance is concerned anyway. Of course, you're always gonna have the nutcases on the forums that want characters like Zarya and Ana nerfed, but by and large, social media is full of praise for the trajectory the developers have taken for the balance of the game. Obviously, as a Zenyatta one-trick, you're going to expect me to really only care about whether or not my main hero is playable. And while I can confirm that he feels much better than he did a few months ago, considering the work I do here on this channel, I have to at least pretend that I care about what Jeff does with the remaining roster. It is still incredibly funny to me when people say Doomfist is a trash pick, as if that's a bad thing. But what about characters we actually want to see played? For starters, not only is dive playable, it's actually fairly strong right now. There are a number of variations of dive you can run at present, and none of them feel like you're putting yourself at an immediate disadvantage for the sake of having fun. That's quite the achievement. The most recent Widowmaker nerf obviously didn't do anything to her viability, still allowing body shot bandits like myself to get more value out of her than I have any right to. But because the meta has shifted into a more switching friendly environment, there are actually way more options to combat annoying sniper setups now. Of course, the legendary combos of old like Nanoblade are still viable, and ever since Jeff added the new countdown voice lines, setting it up has has been easier than ever without even needing voice chat. But there are also other new combos that reward nothing but the uttermost skillful gameplay to achieve the greatness of the play of the game. Honestly, Blizzard is absolutely crushing it with the frequency of their balance updates, but that also means that for the people of the future that didn't play this game every week to see where these patches are getting us, it almost feels like a piece of history is lost. So I feel like it is my grand duty to preserve these memories and create an online diary that can be referenced for many years to come. Today, my friends, we're going to immortalize the Age of Balance patches, much like we have done on our last episode. Making the holy ascension from Reddit meme to meta play, the flanking Roadhog became the new pop stomp menace of Overwatch. More than ever before, Roadhog really was a one-man army that could put the rest of the team on his back to carry them to the glorious lands of the victory screen. I made sure to frame his legacy in appropriate fashion, highlighting the fact that, as much as Hog really was overpowered, he was also the last bastion of defense against the newly discovered hitscan meta. Unfortunately, that was a very short-lived trend. Jeff came in with a nerf hammer, knocking the pig down to what some would say is a weaker state than he was pre-buff. Rest in peace, Roadhog, protector of the flank and collector of salty forum posts. Of course, this doesn't mean that Roadhog players are going to stop flanking, but they are certainly going to be less effective at it. Which begs the question, what is the new meta then? While the quick play format may not be the ideal environment to find the answer to that question, you can be certain that this isn't going to stop me from pretending that it is anyway. So let's find out if all the praise is warranted and see if Overwatch is actually more fun to play now. With that out of the way, our story today takes place on Blizzard Worlds. As much as I'm aware that we had an episode on this map not too long ago, in the countless hours I've spent playing on this new patch, I just couldn't find a better game highlighting how good this patch actually is. Ancient characters that I haven't seen played in what feels like eons have been made playable through the grace of the Kaplan, so what better place to celebrate their second coming than by playing on Jeff's home map. I'm just going to be so free as to assume that his residence lies within the confines of Blizzard World, because otherwise all of this wouldn't make any sense. Speaking of things that make no sense, the compositions that we decided to play. Delphi was fully prepared to throw for content right from the get-go, deciding that a stealthy Hammond playstyle simply wasn't for him. Of course, I was there to offer what little protection my kid could provide, but he just wasn't meant to survive, seeing as there was a Sombra player hiding in the shadows to make sure he can't get away. If you ever wondered how a single player can lose you the first point, congratulations, you just witnessed it. The attackers now had all the space in the world to get themselves in position to cap the objective, with me being the only semblance of a chance we had to keep it. Our player disadvantage only got worse when we lost one of our DPS, while also having the enemy Mercy bring back the one player that I managed to eliminate. Of course, I continued to do the only thing I could in that situation, which is being a pretend tank that really just exists to deliver damage at a bigger package. Delphi immediately realized that he wasn't gonna have any fun playing Hammond into a Sombra, deciding to switch to a real tank. Sadly for him, Sombra would continue to be an annoyance, while Symmetra could have an absolute field day charging her microwave on his barrier. The saving grace in this teamfight was me being granted my Ana's undivided attention, as well as an unexpected nano boost that allowed me to boldly move onto the objective without needing Delphi's protection. A high charge Zarya was nothing to sneeze at, much less if they were armed with a nano, and as such, we barely succeeded in holding onto the objective. The only attacking survivor was a poor mini diva scrambling to stay alive just a little longer to get her mech back, and as Delphi and I were chasing her down to make sure she doesn't get her will, I really had to combat the urge to use my Graviton Surge just to BM her. I really hoped that taking out the mini diva would end the engagement and give us some time to breathe, but the attackers were not intending to unnecessarily bleed time off the clock, immediately pushing in again as soon as they respawned. A strong offense had to be answered with a steadfast defense, meaning that Delphi and I pushed up to defuse their aggression as soon as possible. Feeding off of our confidence, Katara the Tracer player decided to chase down the enemy Mercy to make sure that this time my effort would not be in vain and every elimination remained unresurrected. But our confidence would be our downfall, as my aggressive choke point hold put me in the perfect position to get deleted by a flanking Zenyatta. To complete the turning of tables, their diva tossed her mech into our backline, catching our Ana off guard on what was supposed to be a victorious engagement. With our high damage output and the elimination of our main healer, the attackers figured that they could still win the teamfight despite the losses that their lineup had sustained. Delphi was the last man standing, having to stare down a team of attackers that looked at him like he was the last pack of toilet paper during the start of the pandemic. Once our main tank was eliminated, there was nothing left standing between the red team and the acquisition of the first checkpoint. This round on Blizzard World was looking nowhere near as solid as the last time I was here, leaving me to find out how we can stabilize. The cart was now on the road, and quite frankly, I felt like I was playing against my own team as much as I was playing against the attackers. Yeah, sure, I was currently in the possession of every gold medal that mattered, but that wasn't my point. Minimode, the Sombra player, continued bullying our main tank with nobody but me bothering to poke her, and neither of my DPS were creating enough of a threat to force the enemy Zenyatta to use his transcendance. If I could find a way to keep Delphi in the game, then certainly we as a tank duo would be able to make up for our DPS's deficit. But before any such thing can happen, we had to bait out transcendence. Any amount of game sense was enough to realize that Zen was keeping his ultimate for my graviton surge, so I figured that I might as well play into that just so we can get rid of it as a factor. While Delphi and I were playing for the long con on top of the objective, my Ashe was sitting so far in the back on Blizzard World that I was afraid she might end up in Rialto. Personally, I'm not a fan of overly defensive playstyles, primarily because it's really boring, but also because aggression and confidence have a higher tendency of winning me games. I respawned just in time to ensure the survival of my fleeing Mercy, and to prove just how much better it is to play aggressively, Delphi was dropping down from the top ropes with a massive shatter to not only disrupt the attackers but straight up flatten them. The enemy team was very clearly not expecting such a display of alpha chattery, as half of them were ready to fight back, while the other half were desperately trying to flee the crime scene. I really wish that this paved the way for my team to stop playing like cowards, but all my Ashe decided to do was continue proving why they were a waste of a pocket Mercy. So while most of our team was sitting in the back staring holes into the sky, Delphi and I tried to create an opportunity for an early pick so that we can take the next fight with an advantage. But while we were exchanging pot shots with the enemy tanks, their Sombra just randomly decided to roll up behind us and solo ult Delphi. A very annoying play for sure, but ultimately I could take out not only their Sombra but also the enemy Mercy that tried to save her. A res of our own would bring Delphi back to the game, and everything else from here on out was merely cleanup. That last teamfight reinforced our position for good, a complete reset of the enemy team's positioning, giving us the freedom to decide how we want to approach the next engagement. Well, my Ashe already made her decision, which was standing still in the same spot with a pocket Mercy, which the enemy Symmetra tried to take advantage of by rushing the high ground. Obviously, Ashe got away because not only is she a busted character, she also had a flying health insurance that made it impossible for her to die. Tori was trying to find a way to reconnect with his team, but what he ended up finding was Delphi. Listen, I'm not here to claim that I make the best decisions under pressure, and I can understand that playing Reinhardt into Sombra Symmetra isn't the most fun thing to do, but that shatter could have definitely been used better elsewhere. Once the Symmetra had successfully deleted my main tank, Ashe continued to sit back on high ground with a damage boost to clean up the turrets and eventually hit the air surrounding Zenyatta's body to count for a headshot. You might be wondering where I was while all of that happened. Well, I was coming from the flank when I realized that their Mercy was trying to go for a res. I may not have been able to stop her, but I definitely scared them into blowing Valkyrie for no reason while simply sending the Zenyatta back to spawn. Once again. Getting all these kills was great, but there was still an objective that needed to be stopped, though my chances of taking on Mei and Roadhog on my own was slim enough to where I figured using Graviton Switch to buy some time was a good idea. Since Minimode went from one no-fun allowed character to the next, Delphi saw an opportunity to get off Reinhardt and back on Hammond, allowing him to literally come in swinging to assist me as I was doubling the damage of both of my DPS combined. I could not wish for a better duo in that moment when he served me their Roadhog on a silver platter, not allowing anyone to escape my wrath. Surely there are few things that rival our coordination in Overwatch, meaning there was still a chance to win this game. And the way to do that was by keeping up the pressure via means of taping down the W key in sheer disregard of our team's current positioning. The enemy Zenyatta would learn the value of regrouping and spawn when Delphi rolled up, and as much as I know that my mans was misplaying here, as a Zenyatta main, it's just never fun to see a fellow Zen player get juggled. There was still more than enough time on the clock for us to find a way to lose this game, but so far, Jeff has been holding true to his promise of diversity. There have been multiple hero swaps and characters we haven't seen a lot before, so I'm really wondering what the attackers are gonna try to do to get back into the game. This has been quite an eventful match as far as I'm concerned, and I felt good knowing that we finally put the attackers on the back foot. It has been clear to me that this was gonna be a tank diff kinda match, meaning that Delphi and I wouldn't miss out on an opportunity to chase down the opposing Roadhog. Some may claim that us dedicating so many resources to the elimination of a post-nerf Roadhog may be overkill, but when there's blood in the water, the sharks are gonna bite. The enemy team tried to rush in and help their tank, and as much as it was too late to help him, at least as Zenyatta got to avenge his death. It's too bad that we still had a mercy-pocketed Ashe on high ground, proving that it takes neither skill nor talent to fire lead into a bullet magnet the size of the moon. We emerged victorious out of that team fight, but when I spotted Minimod nonchalantly walking out of spawn all on their own, My BM senses were tingling. A real homie is going to do whatever it takes to BM the guy counterpicking their friends, so there was no hesitation in my action of solo grabbing their mate to show that this is not gonna fly. Of course, Delphi appreciated what I did for him and his ego, making sure that the opposing Roadhog could not interrupt the rightful BM that was currently taking place. Though it seemed like said Hog was not too appreciative of a Hammond rolling into a spawn, and seeing as how I invested my ultimate to BM their teammate, they decided to do the same thing to him. Tragic. At this point, there were only 30 seconds left on the clock, with my Tracer being left alone in the front line. It seemed like she was ready to fully disengage so that we can take the fight with our whole team, but an unexpected nano boost prompted her to risk it for the biscuit, dropping a roided up sticky bomb on the Reinhardt for yet another stagger kill. Sadly, this was another annoyance that Mortax, the Roadhog player, had absolutely no problem shutting down, allowing his Mercy to revive their main tank and initiate the final team fight. The wounds caused by a teabag can go very deep, and when one's ego is damaged, the only way to recover is by dragging others down along with them. The enemy Mei went for the longest flank in low mobility history just to get a chance to cut off my escape and soloed me. Escape? Me? Little did Minimod know that I was not one for pressing S. I face my demons head on, and if said demon is the Ice Queen of Overwatch, then you know that I'm topping my teabag Sunday with a hefty dose of BM. But the game was far from over, since both the enemy tanks were still alive and well on the card, and as we already established, this game was most definitely about the tank performance more than anything else. Delphi did not survive his 1v1 with Mortax while I was busy duking it out with our Reinhardt. It was quite the back and forth between us, with me not being convinced that I could take him out as long as his healers were alive. I was right in my assumption, and when their Ana gave him the boost, I knew that the only way to survive was by investing an ultimate of my own. Kitara's performance had only gotten better as the game went on, making use of my graph to blow up the Reinhardt again before full sending it into the enemy backline to end this fight once and for all. Minimod was the only attacker left contesting the objective, and I was glad that Jeff decided to give me the opportunity to eliminate and teabag them one final time before scoring the fat W. But more importantly than that, I made sure that if somebody is countering my homie, they'll pay for it. The end. If there's one type of player in Overwatch that I feel like I will never understand, it's DPS players. I've said it before and I'll say it again. DPS players, in essence, have been given the power of a god, and yet so many of them content with running boring characters like Widowmaker day in and day out. In a game of superheroes, you just decided to be Hawkeye. I'm not saying it's an ineffective choice, especially in the current meta, but how do you not fall asleep during your play session? But you know how it is. Before you can judge a man, you should walk a few miles in their shoes. And for the few of you who have been sticking around my channel for a number of years now, you might remember that back in my competitive days, I was a huge proponent of cross-training. Even if you never intend to become a main tank, spending a solid amount of time playing that role is going to allow you to better predict what your own tanks, as well as enemy tanks, are going to do. It is an inherently valuable experience for all of you looking to rank up, but just like so many YouTubers, I am notoriously bad at following my own advice. DPS just kind of feels very one-dimensional to me. If I wanted to play COD deathmatch, then, well, I would go and do that. Is what I would say if I wasn't reaching my breaking point. I just need to understand what motivates a DPS player to feed their brains out while simultaneously flaming every single person on their team. How do so many Genji players not understand the concept of line of sight when begging for a nano boost, and what makes somebody pout like a child when they're not given a mercy pocket? The DPS category has been blessed with the largest variety of characters where a simple switch, even when lacking competence, can make all the difference. Heck, before Roku was a thing, I'd swap off Zenyatta all the time to shut down annoying heroes as Sombra, because for some reason DPS players just don't want to swap. And when the entire game is built around supporting the damage portion of your lineup by providing space as well as sustain, your DPS tossing a hissy fit when asked to get off Hanzo can be a real detriment. But hey, maybe there's some kind of reason to the madness. Perhaps all it takes is for me to really get stuck in the role to understand why they make these kinds of decisions. I mean, this isn't the first time I'm having trouble understanding why players do the things they do, much like I couldn't understand what my Ashe was doing on our last episode. I know I usually give you a brief spoiler-free summary of what the last episode was about, but can we all just take a second to ask the question of what the heck was my Ashe doing? Last time I was given a mercy pocket when playing Ashe, I was tearing through the enemy team like they're made of cotton candy. When lacking even the slightest bit of coordination, that combo, at the current balance of the game, is so disgustingly overpowered that even a Zenyatta one-trick like myself can abuse it to heck and beyond. Which begs the question, what was my Ashe doing? Well, I suppose that is the question question we are trying to answer today, and that in quite deliberate fashion. A good reason not to want to play DPS are the queue times, so what better way to avoid them than signing up to play support, backfill into a losing match on Horizon, and then use the priority queue to play DPS. Though granted, it feels like Jeff has seen right through my plan and made sure that I don't get to play DPS on a map that's actually fun. And that trend would continue because our story today takes place on Busan. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of the King of the Hill format in Overwatch. Much like in my card analogy before, I just prefer the real deal objective-based game modes over pretend objectives that merely make for a deathmatch with extra flavor. But if there was ever a map type that lends itself to flexing your DPS muscle, it would definitely be that one. Which means that if there was ever a time for me to show that there's more to my gameplay than one-tricking Zenyatta, this would be it. And since there's always a few Doomfist one-tricks in my comment section trying to sell me the meme that he's actually much more of a complex hero than I'm giving him credit for, requiring a lot of research on the side of rollouts as well as a lot of mechanical skill, I figured that I can get the 2-for-1 whammy by showing just how easy it is to be an annoying Doomfist. Well, today we learned that damage boost and Discord Orb make Zarya do a lot of damage. It really isn't easy to predict the composition anyone's gonna run in today's meta, so the surprise factor was definitely on the blue team's side, allowing them to get the first cap. As is common practice on mecha base, the blue team was holding close in the choke point to make sure that they could catch us before we tried to do anything funny. It's never a good sign starting a match being stuck in your spawn, and while I had the foresight to dodge the Mei wall, my Reinhardt only knew the W variety of tank style, getting himself stuck in a bit of an awkward position. But Delphi and Eskel managed to break through the ice wall and annihilate the opposing Reinhardt, allowing us to move in once the wall crumbled. Of course, it took neither skill nor intellect to whiff literally every cooldown at my disposal and still get a kill on the enemy Zenyatta because the man is simply built different. My team continued to push towards the remainder of the blue team with me coming in as the aerial support, and of course, they would all find their way back to the spawn room. Well, all of them with the exception of the enemy Tracer that tried to harass my Zenyatta. I have to admit that my inner support player was breaking through a bit here, since I can't remember ever having seen a Doomfist that actually bothered peeling for the backline. But I wasn't about to let them collect a free elimination much like I have done on theirs, and topping the whole thing off with a teabag that said, "You're not gonna touch my robot friend." Needless to say that Tracer was not very happy about that. That stagger kill meant that engaging the enemies immediately would be of great benefit to our cause, prompting me to push the blue Reinhardt around like a glorified pinball. Of course, I didn't mean to commit to that fight, but my Ana decided that now was the time to use nano boost, and as such, I had no choice but to go back in. I rolled out towards the enemy Zenyatta for yet another free elimination, and while I am pretty sure that their Mercy was playing with the idea of rezzing him, when I initiated Meteor Strike, she must have definitely changed her mind. My mind, on the other hand, was set on the idea of decimating that tank line on the objective to secure my play of the game. Oh, I forgot about the Mercy. I've definitely made a lot of enemies with that play, and especially that Tracer is going to try and get revenge on me, to which I can only say, bring it on. If there was one player on the blue team that wouldn't forget about the humiliation of dying to an off-meta trash can of a hero, it would be Zula. My teabag was a very clear message to them that this Zenyatta was off limits, but that didn't stop them from attempting an assassination anyway, just that when they realized they failed, they not only submitted to eliminating themselves, but also left the lobby so quickly that neither of us had a chance to rub salt on the wound. Well, there was one less player to worry about, and gave me more time to bully their main tank some more. Though I should have known from experience that Reinhardt players are going to accept getting pushed around only for so long before they snap. Kader barely managed to hit me with a shadow around the corner, to which Delphi decided to respond using transcendance. Seeing my friend take that charge from me, I couldn't help but yeet into a backline to assist him in his effort of taking out the enemy Reinhardt. Once we taught Kader a lesson, I spotted a freshly resurrected Mei whom I was yet to BM. And while the idea was definitely to eliminate them, cancelling their Blizzard with a punch would probably also do the trick. Of course, I would not let them get away regardless, with a couple simple melee attacks sending them back to the spawn. Unfortunately for me, the one who came to replace the short-tempered Zula was a McCree player who gladly reminded me of how deadly it is to get hit by somebody who is supported by a damage boost as well as a Discord Orb. The problem now was that the enemy team had a DPS player that actually seemed competent. Every diving attempt was met by the collective fury of a peeling squad that didn't allow me to continue farming free kills. The blue team was back at it again, holding us in our spawn with the smart usage of ultimate abilities, reviving every player who just so happens to become the victim of their own incompetence. Delphi and I realized that if we still want to win this game, we would have to stop fooling around and put our carry pants on. So far, we were going for silly plays more than seriously trying to win the game, but that would change when a new Tracer took Zula's place in an attempt of assassinating my Zenyatta without realizing just how gargantuan my brain actually is. That was exactly the pick we needed to let doubt and fear run rampant within the enemies, taking a calculated approach as well as every single cooldown under my belt to make the enemy Zarya follow their Tracer's example. Kader, now having swapped to a Winston, tried to primal rage us back into our spawn, prompting Delphi to let out a desperate cry for help. up. At this point I was convinced that the support Doomfist style was flat out superior to whatever nonsense I see these Doom 1 tricks try to pull off. Imagine investing upwards of 30 seconds trying to set up a rollout for a single elimination when you can just make sure that your own team actually stays alive to win the game for you. I mean, get carried by me, of course. Can't forget our DPS mentality here, can we? We had successfully forced Kato to disengage, but when Delphi told me that the monkey was on low HP, I decided to really drive from the fact that there's no escape from the likes of DLC heroes. Though at that point, a short intermission was necessary to get my cooldowns back while waiting for things to calm down on the point. Once fully combat ready, I committed all of these cooldowns and I just waited to get back to the elimination of their last remaining tank player. A task that would not be made easier by a flying rat pumping out healing in excess of what my melee attack can deliver. I love trying to outdamage the left-clicking prowess of Mercy Pockets as much as the next guy, but all good things eventually have to come to an end. Much like this round on Mecha Base had to come to an end. We had one last very chaotic teamfight on the objective that frankly wouldn't make sense to narrate even if I tried. But when the dust settled, the red team would stand victorious, ready to drive the final nail in the coffin during the next round. Listen, I would love to pretend that this round never happened, but I do have to highlight that I start to understand why DPS players try to stick to their characters of choice over just playing mystery heroes. Delphi insisted I should play Widowmaker on Sanctuary, and frankly, judging by what I know about the game and this map, that sounded like a much better idea than trying to play Doomfist with all that open space, but obviously it didn't end up translating into a victory. So rather than needlessly padding out the length of this video, let's initiate the final part of this round of Overwatch and ultimately declare a victor via means of DPS diff. After an embarrassing showing on Sanctuary, we were left with one last chance to prove our worth and really get into the mindset of a DPS player. We had more success with a methodical approach on Mecha Base, meaning that I wasn't about to mindlessly rush into the enemy backline, but I did want to make sure that I can take out some of the blue team's troublemakers to make it a bit easier for the rest of my team to stay alive. Delphi and I may have been on the same page about that idea, but our timing was definitely not on point since he found himself eliminated by the Zenyatta, who was hugging the Ashe that ended up peeling me off of their backline. Adjustments to our strategy had to be made, but I did feel some level of DPS pride rise in my chest. Any blind monkey with a controller could do well on a busted hero like Ashe, and while that's definitely rich coming from somebody who plays Doomfist, at least he was an actual bottom of the barrel pick in this current meta, meaning I wouldn't find myself abusing an overpowered hero. Just a really annoying one. Ultimately, since I'm a projectile player at heart, I ended up swapping to Mei, which was not only a good choice because I didn't need any hit scan warm-up, but also because it should work well enough against what the enemies are playing. Needless to say that with a dysfunctional opening fight such as that, the first cap would obviously go to the blue team. But my hero swap had immediately borne fruit when I cut off the enemy Hammond's escape to make sure you can't get away without a serious case of freeze or burn. Most of the damage had already been done, and all it took was for my diva to chase the dumb rodent down and confirm my elimination. Delphi and I were determined to put the rest of the team on our back as we arrived at the objective to bring destruction wherever we went. An icicle shot in the general direction of the Zenyatta was bound to hit his oversized hitbox, while a slightly more precise headshot on the enemy Ashe was enough to determine the winner of this battle. It was now our turn to push into the choke point and show the blue team that we were no longer afraid of them. Sometimes, playing a hero you are confident on simply beats adhering to meta trends, though I wouldn't know if Mei was meta on this map one way or another as I'm usually dodging it. Either way, Kato was sick and tired of being spawn camped, dropping down on our frontline to create the space necessary for his team to move in. And much to my dismay, Delphi was too busy holding right click on Kato's massive health pool to heal me. The enemies began smashing Q buttons in sheer disregard of their ultimate bank just to make sure they didn't have to return to a life of being spawn camped. But thanks to the high healing output of our Moira, as well as the high damage output of our Zarya, none of them were enough to topple the giant that is our team. The blue team was doing such a poor job of focusing their damage that once my stubby little legs got me back to the objective, our steadfast defense would make a transformation into an aggressive offense, chasing down every last player that had the audacity to challenge us. One such player was Genesis, who rolled up as a Roadhog, believing he could get away with a quick poke. Now I get the idea behind punishing somebody for their poor positioning, but I think I've never seen somebody get so utterly destroyed for attempting to poke. Their Hanzo had a bit more of a sneaky approach to poking, landing a shot that must have been completely random, but I'm sure he's going to claim was totally on purpose. But such insolence could only be answered with an overwhelmingly and unnecessarily aggressive response, by which a Blizzard made sure that we trade eye for an eye, my second DPS for theirs. The Zenyatta barely managed to hide his hitbox around the far corner, but if he thinks that I'm done chasing them down, then he would be sorely mistaken. because unlike Zen, Mei actually has an option for mobility that, when used creatively, allowed me to flank them in very unusual fashion. And while the Zenyatta may have floated away into safety, I definitely wouldn't complain about an opportunity to turn their logging Hanzo into a Japanese popsicle, which I was told are actually fairly delicious. But the enemy Ashe obviously did not take too kindly to being the recipient of my ultimate, chasing me down in a gross demonstration of why that hero is ridiculously busted. Notice how they land one lucky headshot to then proceed to attempt to spam me down, but when that fails, they throw dignity out the window and toss their dynamite, knowing that, unlike me, it will land in the center of the crosshair. I'm sure if they had their ultimate, they would have used that as well. But that little demonstration actually ends this match. We get a small glimpse into the thought process of a DPS player bouncing between defensive and offensive playstyles, trying to adhere to meta trends and ultimately playing what we are most comfortable with. So today, I can conclusively say that... Actually, what can I say? There really was no morale in this video, was there? Huh. Oh well. The end. Aiming in Overwatch is not exactly the be-all and end-all. One of the reasons the game was so wildly successful was because, as much as it has the FPS label attached to it, you can get by just fine without ever playing a character that really tests your aim. Frankly speaking, aiming isn't even the hardest part about the game. It is much more detrimental to your success to constantly make bad decisions as a result of poor game sense or lack of experience than missing a few shots here and there. But if you do want to insist on aiming, then there are different characters for all levels of skill available at your disposal, the easiest of which is Soldier 76. Now, Soldier 76 is a character I never really cared to give the spotlight to. The types of people that choose to make him their main hero are probably the same fellas that only ever eat vanilla ice cream, feel completely content with game journalist difficulty settings in video games, and only ever play human barbarians and fantasy D&D settings because they're basic like that. While there's nothing inherently wrong with enjoying the basic pleasures of life, I think I made my point clear on the last episode about choosing Hawkeye when I could also be Iron Man. F's in chat for that Avengers game, by the way. But for all of us who have seen the developer update in which our Lord and Savior himself highlighted the fact that he wants to see Overwatch go into a more aim-intensive direction, I think it is time to brush up on our head-clicking skills. And hey, what better time to do so than now? After all, I'm trying to learn what it means to be a DPS player ever since what happened on our last episode. In an attempt of understanding the machinations of DPS players, we took it upon ourselves to venture to yet uncharted territory, the land of queue times. While spending more time waiting for a match to start than actually playing in it isn't exactly the most fun activity I can imagine, our skills in the DPS category would be tested to its fullest extent on Busan. And considering the fact that I cannot stop playing DPS heroes as if they are part of the support category, there's still much more I have to learn. As much as our flex DPS muscle has been tickled on that episode, we are yet to reach the apex of DPS prowess in Overwatch, as claimed by the YouTube comment section. Of course, playing other projectile-based heroes would not be all that difficult for me as a Zenyatta one-trick, but there are advantages to engaging in the Call of Duty side of Overwatch as well. I mean, name one thing that's more frustrating than thinking you're about to score a sick play of the game just to have a flying rat escape into the skybox without you having the reach or skill to take them out. If there's one category of characters in Overwatch that allows you to acquire and eliminate the same target before anyone can even call them out, it would be hit scans. But for a brand of heroes that supposedly are all about skill, I sure do find myself eliminated by a lot of characters that don't share my skill set. I mean, what is it about all these low-skill heroes being so much better than my beloved hit scans? I just can't understand why they get to eliminate me for free while I'm actually trying to aim. But maybe Jeff can finally put an end to this injustice via means of the most recent soldier buff. So let's find out if aiming finally reigns supreme by taking today's story to Hollywood. While you guys enjoy this beautiful b-roll of the Halloween version of this map, let me just highlight really quickly that the replay system is currently broken. It won't allow me to turn player outlines off, so for today's episode we're gonna have to deal with some scuffed footage. And for some reason it also looks like I'm missing all my shots in the replay, when clearly that can't be the case. Either way, in order to make things fair, I try to tell my Mercy not to pocket me because the best way to get better at something is by removing the training wheels. Though it didn't seem like she understood my request. Well, I couldn't stop her from following me around, so I might as well drag her along, I suppose. But this would be no ordinary match, for the wild nature of today's meta would rear its head. Not only was there a high ground Bastion to deal with, but also a flanking Symmetra setting up some kind of 800 IQ play that I couldn't even fathom. All I knew was that my team preferred to eat damage in excess of the maximum health pool in the choke point, while completely ignoring whatever nonsense that Symmetra was about to engage in. If I wanted that nuisance to be gone, then I'd have to take matters into my own hands, so I boldly entered her turret-infested lair to take her out before she can escape. I took great offense to the idea that somebody else tried to flank in my presence, so I couldn't help but establish myself as the alpha flanker. With that problem out of the way and a multitude of ultimate abilities about to be ready, our team could swiftly engage the weakened defenders and punish their lapse in judgment as far as their positioning was concerned. Their last chance to hold onto the objective was their Lucio's beat drop, which makes it ever the more unfortunate that he ended up ajaxing it. If you think looking back at this replay is painful as a support player, then let me tell you, it's even more painful when rewatching it at 0.25 speed. You can break almost any stalemate in this game as long as you toss enough ultimates at the problem, meaning that capturing the first point ended up being a swift affair. The objective may be ours, but as we all know, payload maps only get more difficult for attackers to complete the further we advance, meaning our greatest challenge was still ahead of us. As much as capturing the first objective didn't prove to be all that difficult, we knew that we couldn't let up now. Half of the defenders were victims of bad spawn, meaning there was still work for us to do, and not chasing down surviving defenders is a surefire way of losing all the momentum we had acquired. The advantage was definitely on our side, and when faced with a choice between fight or flight, the enemy Bastion opted for a third option in which they proceeded to feed their brains out. All that was left to do was take control of the high ground to catch the defenders before they can approach the card, but when I arrived at said high ground, I was faced with more microwaves than I could handle. And I knew that once the light show began, I would be in big trouble. The enemy Symmetra could load up her beam on my diva to then use that acquired charge to send us back to the spawn. Not getting teabagged by her was almost worse than them actually doing it, because you know that they know that they're better than you, and I hate that. Any moderate amount of game sense would tell us to retreat and regroup, but our less than half HP Genji god decided that he would be the hero that nobody asked for by blowing his ultimate into what would result in certain death. Mercy and Sigma were trying to hold down the fort to make sure that the situation doesn't get any worse than it already is, and while they couldn't save our Genji from his own stupidity, they did eliminate the enemy Symmetra, which I consider to be a big W. We had to press our advantage and use whatever tools were available to us to make sure that the defenders can't trap us in our spawn. Though this is where I should apologize to my Genji for criticizing him, because frankly speaking, using Tac Visor in the middle of a minefield was about as intelligent of a play as what they tried to do with that Dragon Blade. But as we all know, games of Overwatch come down to tank diff 90% of the time anyway, which is something that our diva was determined to prove by turning the tables in our favor. Of course, I wanted to join my comrades and make up for my misplay, but my ISP decided to hold me hostage in our spawn. There is nothing more tilting to me than a bad internet connection, and as much as the replay viewer has a bit of a different version of what happened here, let me assure you that I was ready to smash my keyboard as much as I hope you smash that like button. There's also a subscribe button you can press, but hey, no pressure. I would eventually be released from my prison, and with a lot of internet-related anxiety in my heart, pushed onto the high ground to try and secure our victory. When I realized that the enemies were playing out of my LOS, I decided to drop down to help my Sigma and make sure that we can swiftly dispose of them. It's totally not because I accidentally slid down or anything. At that point I was 100% certain, and the replay confirmed it, that my Sigma knew where the enemies were at present. But my mistake was expecting him to actually engage in combat with them, because while I was trying to stop them from poking us into oblivion, my Sigma decided to not pay attention to any of that until I was already eliminated. Needless to say that this multi-angled attack that I tried to stop would now also be my Sigma's downfall. But if there's one thing my team doesn't know how to do, it's giving up. My diva went full Bloodhound mode, determined to take out the opposing Ana even if it cost her mech. Meanwhile, my Genji was having a wee bit of trouble making his Dragon Blade work between being the recipient of a solo minefield and getting pushed around by their Lucio. While our resident weep eventually came out victorious, his fadeaway teabag made him an easy target for the respawning Junkrat to eliminate. But that Junkrat was not the only one who respawned. I was back on the high ground to deliver a storm of bullets that would shift the tides in our favor. This was my third game on Soldier ever since the recoil changes, and I still have to get used to the idea that I would no longer be the victim of random spread, but I slowly warmed up to the new and improved gunplay to give the defenders a run for their money. A desperate beat drop was meant to keep the defenders in the game, but it was only a matter of time that we rid ourselves of their defiance. The difficulty of this encounter was already ramping up. If the defenders keep up that pace, then breaking through the 2CP on wheels nature of the final point is not going to be easy. Let's see if we can aim ourselves to victory, or if the defenders get any more surprises up their sleeves. With the capping of the second point, the enemy Zarya found herself in a bit of a pickle. Just like on the first cap, we were aiming to build on our advantage by taking out anyone who got bad spawn, but what happened to the enemy Zarya was nothing short of absolute slaughter. But the only thing I was really concerned about at that point was the high ground. As a soldier player, of course I naturally gravitate towards it, but I definitely wouldn't be the only one. The enemy Junkrat had a firm hold of what I desired to make mine, and would prove to my Genji that aiming is not a skill set they rely on. But to really drive home that message, as well as ending our push, they invested their their ultimates solely to blow up our Mercy. That alone was reason enough to retreat, but when our Ana also fell to the spam, we had no choice but to tug tail. But we would not be so easily beaten. Our Sigma was clearly unhappy about losing our momentum, causing him to take to the skies for his ultimate move. The only problem was that he ascended into the arms of the opposing Sigma, who was already holding a boulder to cancel that ultimate. But not to be discouraged, I took it upon myself to create the space necessary for our team to continue their assault by using my ultimate. As much as I could claim a few eliminations, I would eventually be stopped by the opposing McCree's Deadeye. Every action we took forced an equal and opposite reaction of the enemy team, and that in a 2CP scenario put us at a disadvantage. Our Genji tried to break the stalemate by attempting another hero play, but found himself stopped by a sleep dart. Now I want to spare you some graphic imagery here, so rest assured knowing that he was eliminated, resurrected, and dumpstered right away again. I'm afraid that the defenders had successfully broken our Genji's will to fight. I had obtained a few eliminations while that whole meme was taking place, but since we had to break through a disgusting defender spawn advantage, we would definitely need everyone on our team to pull their weight. Mercy and I successfully escaped the tower defense grinder that is the third point of Hollywood, taking a break to gather our forces as well as our thoughts. I tried again to communicate to my Mercy that I really didn't want her to hard pocket me, but try as I might, I just couldn't shake her off my belt. At that point, I felt like there was only one way to win this game: give in to my supportive urges and forsake my life in the name of team play. My Sigma had grown timid by then already, while my Diva was trying her best to contest the high ground, but we're not gonna get far without making a decisive strike. Forget aiming, forget the glory of a play of the game, and forget my DPS pride. It was time to go on the flank and really make use of that pocket Mercy. The enemy tanks had no choice but to forsake the high ground and blow a number of very important cooldowns to stop me from tearing through their backline. And it was that opening that my Sigma could use to, with the help of a nano boost, obliterate their defensive lineup and allow us to claim the objective. We had finally broken the stalemate by setting aside our selfish desires to work together and achieve a common goal. And finally, I learned that it's not aiming your gun that wins you games, it's aiming to work together. The end. Credit where credit is due. For all the bad that's happening in 2020, it's been a very exciting year for Overwatch, as far as balancing is concerned. I mean, the one thing that new content and Overwatch 2 have in common so far is the fact that they're non-existent. It's been a year since they announced the sequel and hereby declared that updates for the original game would be minimal, but we haven't gotten as much as a pinky toe worth of information. Anyway, we take what we can get, and these balance updates are actually pretty dope. Considering the fact that buffs and nerfs would usually come in intervals of 6 months, that's quite something. And I mean, we're talking about Widowmaker of all heroes. There are few characters that impact players' ability to enjoy the game as much as her. On the one side, she gives credit to Blizzard's claim of Overwatch being an actual FPS, but on the other side, who enjoys getting one shot across the map? Now, of course, her ability to do so has not been impacted at all, but a lot of people always said that Blizzard's design philosophy around snipers has been really weird. In a game built around counterplay, you shouldn't remove characters' weaknesses more than you should accentuate their strengths. For Hanzo, Ashe, and Widowmaker to have such reliable means of combating their counters in close range made them a pain in the butt to fight, particularly when involving pocket mercies. Listen, I'm perfectly fine with people who have insane aim to still be able to pop off on Widowmaker, and as much as I can produce some highlight-worthy clips after a few days of practice, it always bothers me when an average Andy like me can just hop onto a hero and start getting insane value without even having mastered them. So can I still get away with being a body shot bandit, or did Jeff and the Overwatch team successfully raise Widowmaker's skill floor? Now, we have already covered a few episodes ago that the best training ground to test your DPS skills is on the King of the Hill format. Since these maps are really just death matches in disguise, DPS players really get to flex their muscles, and I on the other hand have to prove that I can keep up with them. Ilios well would be my first proving ground, meaning I had to show what I was made of under suboptimal circumstances while hoping that the next round would take us to ruins. The enemy team was featuring more flankers than I anticipated, with the enemy Genji immediately looking to mess me up. With a slight hint of panic, I took to the skies to avoid his anime rage, and more than that, even managed to take him out. But before I could even begin feeling smug about that play, I found myself eliminated by their second flanker, who then proceeded to also eliminate my Moira. The rest of my team didn't realize what was happening in our backline as they boldly moved towards the enemy spawn until it was too late. Thankfully, we had done enough damage to win the first fight and thus secure the initial cap, but at that point, I already knew that this was bound to be a difficult match for me. The enemy Tracer was still alive, running circles around my team, but Jeff will grant me the sweet taste of revenge as I spotted her blinking into my direct line of sight. Meanwhile on the front line, my Echo, whose name I'm embarrassed to admit took me way too long to realize that was Genji backwards, dive bombed the opposing Genji for a quick and easy elimination. One that would be immediately resurrected, albeit in my direct line of sight. I wouldn't miss out on an opportunity to boost my critical hit statistic by firing into a stationary target, though once I had acquired that elimination, the enemy Hammond decided to turn this round of Overwatch into a survival game for me. Thankfully, I have unhealthy amounts of experience in that genre of game. I swiftly escaped onto the enemy high ground in hopes of finding protection with my Lucio, and the enemy ball had no choice but to retreat. But there was more than just one fight currently taking place. The two Roadhogs tried to hook each other off the map just for our Lucio to take the glory instead. Assuming they could turn the tides in their favor, Falcon tried to get a multi-kill with their sticky bomb, and well, I mean, they did kill two players. It's just unfortunate that they were one of them. While I was in our backline freaking out about the slightest bit of poke damage coming my way, our Echo was just kind of leisurely hanging out in the sky, hunting down eliminations with no care in the world, and frankly speaking, kind of putting the rest of us on their back. Though all of that carrying would not stop Falcon from redirecting their attention and making it their mission to hunt me down once again. My health pool got decimated so quickly that even a grappling hook couldn't save me anymore. But it was obvious at that point that my team wasn't happy about the enemies just running into our backline, and that Tracer specifically was getting away with murder way too often. I didn't realize it at the time of playing, but seeing in the replay that my Hammond and Lucio tried really hard to avenge my death gives me a newfound appreciation for this team. And as much as that kind of behavior was oozing Giga Chad energy, unfortunately it was not oozing point presence energy, and as such, the blue team could easily overrun whoever was left to defend it for an easy backup. Now, if there's one thing I have in spades as a Zenyatta player, it's game sense. I realized that if we are to win this game, it's not going to be on the back of my aim, but that doesn't mean that I can't play the recon assist. My ultimate would reveal the enemy team's exact location, which allowed my Lucio to not only find a target, but also the perfect time to engage in order to get an environmental. My Roadhog also made use of the additional intel by rushing into the opposing Brigitte to take her out and allow the rest of our team entry to the capture point. The blue team was so concerned with playing around sniper sightlines that they didn't at all pay attention to my Echo, who was coming in hot from the skybox to delete their Baptiste off the map. It was kind of amazing to see what my team was able to do on the back of me doing nothing but press Q and exist. You can tell that the fear of Widowmaker still affects players' positioning unlike any other threat in the game. By the end of this round, I found myself having done very little in the damage department, and more so simply created the perception of a threat that needs to be played around. If I can keep that ruse up into the next map, maybe we can actually win this game. But obviously, I didn't want to end this match without having clicked any heads. We may have won the first map, but I can't say that I was exactly pleased with my performance. Don't be mistaken, the HP nerf makes a big difference. Much like Widowmaker creates fear that affects the enemy team's positioning, the threat of being dove did the same to me. Unfortunately, I would not be granted the benefit of running Widowmaker on Ilio's ruins, now having to find a way to make her work on Lighthouse instead. I'm sure seasoned Widowmaker players would have much less of an issue with the specific maps than me, but that's kind of the point. I want to find out if any monkey on a controller can get value out of Widowmaker like I have already proven was the case with Echo. Falcon was very determined to make this difficult for me, now having switched to a Doomfist. Well, knowing where hitscan heroes want to position themselves, they went through the effort of setting up a rollout to smash me to bits, but I was already gone. Rewinding just a little bit will show a novice Widowmaker getting attacked by a Genji, and as much as I had my escape route all figured out with a venom mine and everything, I was unfortunate enough to meet the opposing Roadhog on my way to the Mega Health Pack, which naturally didn't bode well for my chances of survival. Our tanks were the only ones that actually made it to the capture point, but sheer tenacity can keep you alive only for so long. The objective was in the hands of the blue team, and now more than ever, I felt like I was a big handicap to my team. Considering my range advantage and the fact that I was the first to bite the dust, I respawned soon enough to try and lay down suppressive fire. But more than suppression, my tanks could have really used some more bona fide devastation. Once again, all I achieved was to affect the enemy team's positioning without producing any results on the back of it. Although an opening pick on the enemy Genji wasn't a bad start, I immediately found myself dove by Falcon once again. But you see, my teammates were such absolute giga chats that even if I barely landed any shots, they could make use of the fact that the enemy team really wanted to get rid of me. And that's where our comeback began, because once both the enemy DPS were taken care of, there was nothing that could stop our Echo from tearing through the enemy team with their skill beam. Well, except for the enemy McCree coming back from spawn. I found it weird at first that the Genji would switch to a McCree even though he still had a Dragon Blade, but I suppose he realized that I wasn't really doing anything while our Echo definitely needed to be taken care of. Speaking of taking care of things, that same McCree had absolutely absolutely no shame, and rather than trying to impress with a public display of hitscan prowess, he sent our Winston back to the spawn with the legendary triple fan the hammer. Losing our main tank definitely put us on the back foot, but at that point we all knew who the weak link on the enemy team was. If we can keep their DPS on the respawn train, then surely we'd be able to hang on to the objective. And to achieve that, there was no ultimate too valuable, causing our Zarya to blow her graviton surge in order to keep their Doomfist at bay. Things started to get really crazy when everybody decided that now was the time to smash their Q buttons with reckless abandon just to be able to finally take the fight to the point where I would have no direct line of sight. And they would be right. All I could do was be patient and hope for somebody to get pushed out of cover, which granted did allow me to pick up an elimination, but Falcon wasn't done harassing me yet. Honestly, I completely lost sight of them after my grapple and I just kind of assumed they would try to contest the objective, which is the exact mistake that led to my elimination. But that crime obviously didn't go unnoticed, with my entire team turning around to avenge my death. But credit where credit is due, after a successful assassination, Falcon retreated to a health pack rather than full sending it into my team. With me back in spawn, the position affecting threat of a Widowmaker was gone, and what made it even worse was the fact that their McCree just suddenly decided to absolutely pop off and eliminate core members of our team. The dive bomb came in too late to save anyone, and since so many of us had perished at that point, we'd have to go back to the drawing board. The only saving grace was the fact that Falcon tried to chase our Lucio down, which not only led to his demise, but also what I can only assume was a very satisfying teabag for Fabi. We were one team fight away from taking this map, and subsequently the victory for this match. Their Doomfist having fed his brains out meant that we had a brief window of opportunity in which we could really push our advantage to try and end this game once and for all. And that's not something that you have to tell my team twice. Our main tank immediately jumped onto the point with unparalleled confidence to show the enemies that we didn't even need to be on Ilias ruins to take this W. Winston had successfully forced the opposition to contest him on the objective, allowing our team to send the cavalry in to drive home the fact that our monkey was never meant to be a sacrifice, but instead the spear that leads our forces. None of us had any reservations when it came to the usage of our ultimates, because rather than worrying about the next team fight, we were here to ensure that there would be no next team fight. The enemy team made a valiant effort to try and stall out the objective long enough to get some of their own crucial ultimates online, but at the end, only one team could prevail, and that team was us. I suppose there are some things that are just never going to change. So long that Widowmaker has the ability to one-shot her enemies across the map, she is and always will be a threat that needs to be played around. But I can definitely tell you, based on my attempts of playing her after the nerf, that off-pick body shot bandits aren't gonna have it quite as easy anymore. You die really quickly against any flanker with even a moderate amount of skill, meaning it's do or die when it comes to your aim as well as your positioning, depending on the map of course. It really feels like she's exclusively a high rank problem now, and might not annoy me quite as much in my casual matches anymore. But how do you feel about the most recent patch? A lot of heroes have been tweaked, and I'm definitely planning to take a look at all of them. To suggest that I have any idea how to justify the reasoning behind many a balanced decision coming from Blizzard would be ridiculously bold. Leading theories are suggesting that there isn't actually any rhyme and reason at all, and instead we're all just part of a massive social experiment to see how long it takes us to develop Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, the World of Warcraft community is already there. They went from, oh my god, why are there pandas in my gritty fantasy game, to, oh my god, why does the Horde get furries but not the Alliance? Needless to say that I no longer associate with that IP to any capacity, which is funny coming from somebody playing a video game in which a hamster is controlling a proportionally giant mech. Either way, the most recent Symmetra buff adds itself to my list of things that to this very day I cannot explain why Blizzard thought that was a good idea. But hey, that doesn't mean that I'm not willing to learn. And since we have been taking a look at all the recently balanced adjusted heroes for a couple episodes anyway, why not dedicate one to Symmetra? Really, the only thing standing between me and my thorough testing are DPS queue times. Man, if only there was a way to kill some time while waiting for my queues to pop. Usually with these types of challenges, I try to give myself a fighting chance by completing them on a map that favors the hero I have to play. Now, considering how off-meta of a pick Symmetra is, I don't actually know which maps do favor her, and as such, we found ourselves on Watchpoint Gibraltar. But one thing that is as certain as the changing of seasons, where there is high ground, there will be hitscan heroes. The red team would roll out with an assortment of long-range characters that, at that point in time, I had absolutely no idea how I was supposed to fight. But you can tell that Overwatch has been around long enough for everyone in the lobby to know exactly what they should expect. Considering the importance of high ground control on this map, everyone knew how to fight for it. Well, everyone with the exception of yours truly. While my Hammond was rolling circles around the objective, I was awkwardly tossing up right clicks that may have had the intention of hitting somebody, but really, I didn't believe they actually would. Tipsy, the Ashe player armed with a mobile steroid unit, made it very difficult for me to actually aim my projectiles in fear of getting one shot, and even my Winston was not able to get her off the bridge. In an attempt to fight fire with fire, Turd Boy the Widowmaker Widowmaker, it's funny that he isn't the one playing Symmetra, could equalize the engagement by finally getting rid of Tipsy. But who really wants to be held responsible for their poor positioning and or decision making when you can simply get res like nothing happened in the first place? All these hitscan heroes continue to show why they are the kings of high ground heavy maps, to the point where I was really questioning why I even bothered to pretend like I was doing anything. But I wasn't the only one who didn't get to participate in the sniper battles. The enemy Roadhog came in hot from the flank specifically to eliminate the one player that they can reach without getting headshot. Me. I'm sure all the Symmetra mains in the comment section would have a perfectly suitable strategy to combat a flanking pig, and while I was feeling a bit smug about my teleporter play, ultimately my skills will be found lacking and I was sent back to the spawn room. I kinda hate to admit that there seems to have been a good reason as for why nobody cared to peel the Roadhog off of me in the backline. It's because they were perfectly capable of spawn camping the attackers without any of my help at all. Turret Boy did a good job showing me what it looks like when you actually shoot the people you reveal when using your ultimate, as opposed to just expecting your teammates to act on it. Which they still did. I mean, my Winston had no reservations about making the enemy spawn area his home just to make sure that their supports can't make it out alive. And as much as our Widowmaker was dominating the sniper battle so far, confidence is a flimsy shield, and Turret Boy's forward positioning would finally be punished by Magnus. Of course, Miracle tried to undo their mistake, as Mercy tends to do, but the opposing Hammond must have been just as sick of all the resurrecting as me, giving him a good reason to punish that bold move. But the attacking team in large had still adopted a very timid playstyle, meaning despite some key picks, they decided not to push their advantage just yet. Of course I was back in the front line by then, but really my contribution to the fight has been minimal, and whoever survived the most recent poke war was now hiding in the server room. It felt like every sideline was now being controlled by the red team, and once again our Winston tried to create some space for us to move out, but found himself eliminated as a result. Well, if our tanks can't take control of the high ground, then maybe I can. I used my teleporter to cross the distance, but once at my destination found none of the enemies occupying the space. At that point I tried to pull off my best hit scan impression as I fired off right clicks into the enemy team, who was more concerned with the objective than they were with my mere presence. I found myself stuck between a rock and a hard place as their Ash had me pinned down from the server room while the Roadhog continued to poke me from our spawn side. And eventually, because of course I'd be kissing the floor once again. But I would not be the only one, because Magnus was making a point for how ineffective the most recent Widowmaker nerf really was to somebody who knows what they are doing, as they clicked head after head of every single teammate of mine trying to move out. To say that we were on the back foot would be an understatement. No amount of desperate stalling could loosen the attacker's grip onto the objective, and more worrying than that was the potential threat of a snowball defeat. We had to get our act together and come up with a counter strategy, but how's that even supposed to look like with a Symmetra? The gates to the second point opened, and I gotta say I was not looking forward to what followed. Turret Boy was determined to go down like a hero, taking down his Widowmaker counterpart before being annihilated himself. Meanwhile, I was left feeling very inadequate when my puny little beam had to measure up against Moira's Coalescence, a standoff that I was bound to lose. Our Hammond was the only one left alive, and well, the bull did bold things, by which I mean that he is nearly impossible to eliminate because the harder he feeds, the more shields he gets. I was really looking forward to getting to play the video game again when leaving spawn, except the enemy Widowmaker wholeheartedly disagreed with that idea. It is rather interesting to see how, on the first point, both of our teams were playing very reserved while waiting for their respective hit scans to open up with a pick, well knowing that either side had a mercy to rectify it right away. But as soon as the attackers managed to get the upper hand, they boldly pushed all the way into our second spawn to show that no cakes were given about whether or not we wanted to participate in this round of Overwatch. It took us way more effort than I'm willing to admit just to kill a single Roadhog in our spawn, but once that annoyance was taken care of, we were finally free to leave our spawn in anticipation for yet another headshot. Ever since the last episode in which I was taking a look at the newly nerfed Widowmaker, I know how important it is to take high ground control away from snipers. Just the threat of her very existence changes the whole game, and unlike me, Magnus actually knew how to land a shot. Either way, I could successfully take control of the high ground while my team pushed the attackers off the payload, and as such, we had finally established a bit of a foothold. Turret Boy, now having swapped to a Genji, understood as much as me how important it was to keep these hit scans occupied, and with the help of my AOD type right-click spam, we made sure they couldn't click heads in peace. My Genji was making for a worthwhile distraction while I snuck up on Tipsy for a quick elimination before dropping down to microwave the pick like a dollar store TV dinner. Magnus decided to throw honor out the window to assist the Roadhog via means of SMG spam, and an unfortunately timed reload assured that this strategy ended up being successful. Thankfully, I bought my team enough time to kill the enemy Hammond in our backline so that by the time the attackers had taken care of me, they could roll up and take out whomever I couldn't kill myself. As I walked my low mobility mobility self out of spawn, I couldn't help but get Zenyatta vibes. It really sucks taking so long to get back to the fight because you feel like every second you spend walking rather than fighting is putting your team at a disadvantage. My team, however, didn't care about whether or not I was present, for they would be the ones to deliver the stagger spawn punishment that they were victim of on the first point. At that point, I was fairly certain though that Magnus' hero choices were strictly made just to annoy me, because once I had denied their Widowmaker high ground the first time around, they decided to switch to Tracer and ignore everyone else while trying to attack me in my den. But what I lacked in survivability, my Hammond more than made up for as he tactically positioned himself as my personal bodyguard. All I had to do was chain 2 right clicks on Magnus' twitchy little legs, and at last, revenge would be mine. Where the enemy hit scan did not allow me to do as much as peeking them on the first point, it was now I who denied them the privilege of visibility with my constant right click barrage. I know the temptation of wanting to get the slightest bit of damage out there just to feel like you're actually playing the game, but it will be that exact urge that ultimately created Asher's demise. With only 40 seconds left on the clock, Magnus made the swap to Doomfist and immediately tried to challenge me again, though this time they realized what kind of danger they put themselves into, and when they saw the return of my bodyguard, they quickly changed their mind. Since Magnus didn't want to play anymore, I decided to take matters into my own hands and, armed with a pocket mercy of my own, take on the 2v2 against Tipsy. They realized in no time what kind of danger they were in as the sound of a million angry bees followed the growing size of my microwave beam. Meanwhile, in our backline, Magnus must have had a severe lapse in judgment because they somehow found themselves in no man's land as far as the rest of their team was concerned, and for some reason passed up on the perfect opportunity to take out my Ana. Instead, Magnus decided to take their respawn timer into their own hands by rocket punching their way straight into a minefield, leading to a glorious death via explosions. And unfortunately for the red team, this is all she wrote. Their impatience born in an early advantage put them in a constant stagger train without them ever being able to take a fight with all 6. I don't really know how to feel about that game, to be honest. I mean, I was completely useless on the first point, likely due to my own inexperience when it comes to playing Symmetra, especially on this map. But I'm not sure what to make of this buff. I can't remember a single moment in which plus 25 HP made the difference between me living and me tossing my keyboard out the window. So I really don't know what Blizzard's idea was. Maybe it's just a token buff that is supposed to remind the community that, hey, that hero still exists. And I guess they were successful? Here I am playing Symmetra for a video when otherwise I wouldn't. But how do you guys feel about our favorite Lightbender? I know that the HP buffs and nerfs ended up making a bigger difference on Brigitte and Widowmaker, but what about Symmetra? Well, feel free to leave your own hot takes down in the comment section below. And until then, thank you everybody so much for watching another episode of Stories in Overwatch.